On September 22nd, 2018, Michael met a girl on the subway. She entered his life as mysteriously as he left mine. On that day, he found something he had always been searching for, and in payment, he lost his future. I don't think Michael's friends and families know what really happened since that first meeting, and why it was so significant. The police certainly didn't know. Only Michael really knows. And me. I know because I was there. I saw it all. Or, well, most of it. I don't know if they really want to know what happened to their loved one, and they probably wouldn't believe me if I told them. So, I'm writing this down for someone to know, so that someone out there will know their story. I think it's what Michael would have wanted. And maybe Madeline, too. On that Monday morning, Michael sat down on the L train with his headphones on, making the commute to college that he made almost every weekday. He was a shy kid, still unsure about being a grown-up, but not a kid anymore. The in-between is hard to navigate, and I know that all too well. Michael never talked to anyone. He often did homework or read a book. His fiction of choice was usually horror or short story collections, or both. I always like to take note of what most people are reading on public transit. It's so rare these days. But on that morning, however, a girl sat next to him. She walked down the aisle, looking left and right for an available seat, and she made eye contact with him. He moved his bag for her, and she smiled and nodded and sat down. The girl had chin-length lavender hair with lovely dark eyes and prominent dark eyebrows. She had on a huge backpack that she clutched to her chest when she sat down next to him. She had beat-up combat boots on and gray tights that were ripped. Her charcoal denim jacket had pins on the front and an embroidered patch on the back. The patch showed a cartoon Red Devil woman. Over the top, it said, La Diabla. Her flannel shirt underneath was also ripped. I noticed that the knee showing through the ripped jeans was bruised and scratched, like she had taken a bad fall. She was really a beautiful girl, if not a little rough around the edges. She looked about the same age as Michael, possibly a college student as well. Now, call me a creep, call me a voyeur, but I love people watching, and there was something magnetic about the two of them. I'm an old woman and I've had plenty of love in my life, and I remember what it was like to be young and infatuated. In truth, I wanted to see if the polite shy boy from the subway would succeed in talking to the attractive young woman. It sounds strange, but I was rooting for him. The girl stared at him unapologetically. She had a happy smirk on her face that told me she was going to be a real firecracker. Most people on the subway kept their heads down, but not that girl. She was radiating warmth and energy. She wanted to connect. If she were an older man or not quite so lovely to look at, it would have been off-putting, but there was a goodness about her, and I hoped he would look up and see what I saw in her face. I could see the back of Michael's neck getting red, and I knew he had sensed her looking at him. Finally, he looked sideways and up into her face. She was sitting up very straight, and he was hunched over, pretending to look at his phone. I saw them lock eyes, and it was magic. "Hi," she said. Michael said as he fumbled his earphones out and let them flop down into his lap. "I'm sorry, what?" he said, straightening up at last. "I said hi," she chirped. Her smile was infectious, and he smiled back, a big, goofy grin I'd never seen on him. "Hi," he said after he pulled his lips back over his teeth and regained the ability to speak. "I'm Madeline," she said, and held her hand out over her backpack to shake his. She looked back at me for a moment, clocking my presence. She did not make eye contact, and I pretended to look back down at my novel. "Michael," he said, and squeezed his arm over his backpack to meet her hand in the middle. They shook hands, and I could see something pass between them. He looked at their entwined hands like he wasn't sure if his arm belonged to him anymore. It's nice to meet you, Madeline," he said, shaking her hand with the slow movements of someone under deep hypnosis. "Ew, it always sounds weird when people say it. It's too formal. Just call me Mads. That's what my friends called me. I don't know why I just don't open with that," she said, releasing him from her grip, but not her gaze. "Mads. Okay, that's a cool nickname," he said, pulling his hand back to his side across what now felt like an abyss between them. "You want one?" she said with a devilish grin. "One of what?" he replied. "A nickname. Mike, Mikey, Mick?" she started. No, I hate all of those," he said, laughing and relaxing a bit. I was feeling proud of him. I really was. At each stop, people would file off and no one got back on. I think that made him feel more comfortable too. It was like they had their own private train car to get to know each other. Except for me. There was no one else in that end of the train car, and they didn't really pay me any mind. That's what happens when you get older. You become invisible. I don't mind it though. It's all the better to people watch. "Oh, you're fancy. I get it, Michael," she said in mock aristocratic tone. "I've never seen you on this train before," he said before he could stop himself. I could tell he was embarrassed for mentioning it. The way he said it was so full of admiration that it would take an idiot not to know what that meant. "How could I have never noticed you before?" "I just moved here, or I just moved to this area," she said. "Oh, so you're from Philadelphia?" he said. "Yeah, just started taking classes at the community college," she replied. "Oh, me too," he said with a face glowing with hope. "I mean, not the community college, the other one, the state college," she said quickly. "Oh, right, Penn?" he said with a heart full of the blackest, deepest pool of disappointment that they wouldn't be classmates. The girl's face reflected his own disappointment, but in a much more profound way. It was hard to look at her in that moment. It was a look of regret and sorrow with a lightning bolt of anger ripping through it. I wondered what she had gone through and what she wanted. I couldn't stop watching them, though. But when my stop came, I had to get up. I walked past them to the subway door and looked back over my shoulder just as I started to step out. I saw her looking at me for just a moment, and then she looked back at him. As I walked by the windows, I saw that she had gotten him smiling again, and she was taking one of his earbuds and putting it into her own ear. With their heads tilted close together and her foot tapping in time with the music, they looked like a perfect couple. I was happy for him and worried for her, but I wasn't sure why. The next day I saw them again. I sat right behind him that day. After 3 stops north, Mads got on again. She stepped into the subway car and looked disoriented for a moment. Then she looked around and spotted Michael. She smiled, and the world lit up around her. I can't describe her without describing the way she made me feel, and I'm sure he felt the same way, if not stronger. The subway car moved to her emotions. That's how some people are in this world. They feel things so deeply that everyone around them catches it too. It was impossible not to be happy when she was happy, and equally as difficult to not feel the greatest sorrow and hopelessness when her smile faltered. Mads pranced towards him, using the dingy metal poles to propel her down the aisle. She plopped down on the seat next to him, and Michael ripped his headphones out and grinned sheepishly. Never had I seen a young man so enraptured by someone as he was with her. "Oi, how are you today, Sir Michael?" she said in a terrible British accent. "Oh, stop that," he said with a blush and a downward glance. The self-conscious hunch was back, and I implored him in my head to sit up straight and look at her in the eyes. I admit, I invested too much in those two strangers, but it was so much better than my book, and I wanted this young man to be changed by this young woman in all the best ways, just like in the movies. But life isn't a movie, you know. The sooner we all acknowledge that, the sooner our expectations will quit destroying us. Okay, Mikey, so how's the music scene today? She said, taking one of his earbuds again. Well, I have a lot of options. I mean, I like a lot of different music, so, you know. He stuttered, trying desperately to impress her. No, what were you just listening to? I want to know what the soundtrack to your mood is today, she said earnestly. He locked eyes with her and did straighten up just a little bit. Well, I was just listening to... And he turned his phone screen towards her. Lola? I love this song. Wow, you like the Kinks, she said, grabbing his phone and restarting the song. Well, I don't know a lot about them. I don't know much about music, to be honest. I just hear something I like and I download it. There are a lot of... He paused, chuckling and blushing a little. Soundtracks on here? He said with a wince of deep regret at the end. Meanwhile, Mads had unplugged the earbuds and turned the sound way up so that Lola was playing out loud. She got up and danced with the phone in her hand. Michael looked around in embarrassment and realized there was just one sleeping homeless man at the end of the car. Everyone had gotten off at their stops. He didn't even notice that I was grinning and bobbing my head behind them. Michael looked back at Mads dancing. She danced with wild abandon, her eyes closed, and heavy backpack and worries left on the subway seat next to Michael. He smiled brilliantly and watched her sway to the music. I got up as quickly as my old legs would move me and walked to the back exit of the subway car. I suddenly felt like I was intruding, and my stop was coming up soon anyway. I was tempted to stay on and watch them and just take the loop all the way back to my stop, but I couldn't be late for work. Being a librarian at an elementary school wasn't exactly fast-paced, but a group of eager second graders were scheduled to be in the library that morning. I know those kids would be eager to hear the next installment of Charlotte's Web, read by yours truly. On my way out of the subway car, I saw Mads pull Michael up out of his seat. With a little hemming and hawing, she got him to join in the fun. He attempted some jerky, awkward moves that absolutely delighted her. The last thing I saw before I headed towards the stairs that day was the homeless man looking up, bleary-eyed, at the dancing lunatics at the other end of the car. He coughed and went back to sleep, and I watched the subway pull away. It was filled with light and youthful happiness. I went into work smiling that day. The next day was Saturday, so I didn't see them again until the following Monday. When I got on, Michael was sitting up straight, with no headphones on, and a neatly wrapped package on his lap. Mads got on her usual stop, flitted down the aisle, and unceremoniously dropped down onto the seat next to him. "Morning, Mikey," she said with the low register and lowered lids of a woman talking to her lover. Michael swallowed audibly. Perhaps they had crossed paths that weekend as well. They seemed like peas in a pod. "I wanted to give you something. It's something that's important to me. You were asking me last time about, things I treasured or things that mean something to me, and I guess this is one of those things," he said and handed her the package. Mads lit up and my heart fluttered with hers. The wrapping paper was lavender, with pale green vines winding over and under it. There was something beautiful and heartbreaking about it, just like her. "For me? Wow," she said and ripped the paper off, but then thought better of it and folded it neatly and put it into her backpack. She was left holding a book. "The gift is the book, not the wrapping paper," he laughed. I know, but the paper is so beautiful," she said, looking at him with real admiration, and maybe even love. "Well," he said, nodding to the book. Mads looked down at the paperback book in her hands. It was lovingly worn at the edges, and I knew it must be his personal copy of a beloved book. She looked back up at him, the smile gone from her mouth. I dared to inch a tiny bit forward in my seat to see the title. It read, Ghost Story by Peter Straub. I'd seen him finish that book on the subway a few weeks before. I remember him closing the back of the book slowly, and then holding the book to his chest for a moment. I knew it was dear to him. Mads looked at him with her lovely eyebrows bunched into a frown. Her eyes were alive with tears. Her mouth tried to work out a sentence for a moment, but then fell slack. The lights in the subway dimmed for a moment and then went back to a ghastly neon white. "Are you okay? You don't have to read it. I'm sorry. Some people don't like horror. I shouldn't have assumed," he said. I felt my joy draining out as Mads stood up. She was holding the book to her chest, and then she handed it back to him and picked up her backpack. "It's okay," she said, regaining some control so as not to devastate him. "I just have to go. It's my stop soon." I realized then that I had missed my stop. Somehow the time had gone so fast during this seemingly momentary exchange. We were all the way to Race Street already. Michael tried to stand up and looked around, confused as well. "Ah, shoot, I missed my stop," he said. Mads was moving away from him towards the subway door. Not a soul was left in our car. I could see people in the car behind us and in the car in front of us. The light seemed warmer in those cars, and less harsh. I wished I hadn't gotten so goddamn nosy and had gotten on any car but this one. "Mads, hey, look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," he was saying, trying to follow her down the aisle. The subway car was rocking back and forth and seemed to be going much faster than safe. I saw the lights in the tunnel whizzing by like we were on a spacecraft in an old movie going the speed of light. Mads stood facing the door, unfazed by the speed and the rocking of the car. She wasn't holding on to anything, and she didn't seem to hear Michael at all. She just stood there, stock still, looking out the windows of the door, waiting for them to open with a look of panic and fear and acceptance. I realized that I, like Michael, had probably never seen her get off before. It's possible that these two people had spent time together outside of the subway, but I didn't think so. I don't know how I knew that, but I just did. I also sensed that Mads was terrified to get off the subway. "Mads?" Michael was shouting now, trying to hold on to the pole without falling over, as the train suddenly came to a screeching stop. Michael was thrown back into his seat. I stayed seated, gripping the metal bar in front of me, too stunned and afraid to move. I could feel her fear, and I think he could too. The doors slid open at a horrifyingly slow speed. They creaked with rust. The platform was pitch black. She stood staring at it, gripping her backpack to her chest. Finally, she stepped out onto the platform, and dim, flickering yellow lights lit her path to the stairs. She stood, her face devoid of emotion, and slung her backpack onto her back. She walked as if towards the guillotine and did not look back. Once she climbed enough stairs for us to only see her boots running up one after the other, 3 figures moved slowly out of the darkness and up the steps after her. The subway stuttered and started up, going the other direction. The sound of the old doors sliding shut snapped Michael out of his shock. He ran towards the door and tried to pry it open. "Mads?" he screamed. He looked around the subway car, which had regained its normal speed and light, looking for a witness. Finally, he looked at me, and we locked eyes. I had almost forgotten that I was there. It was like being in a dream or an audience in a play. I didn't think my presence was known. "Did you see?" he asked me, gripping the pole in front of me with white knuckles. His eyes were full of tears and he was shaking. I was too, and I knew we were feeling what she was feeling. We looked into each other's eyes and let the wave of fear, desperation, pain, acceptance, and finally, nothingness wash over us. When the nothingness was gone and we pulled up to the next stop, he blinked, looked confused, and moved away from me. He picked up the book and his backpack and got off the subway. I rode all the way to the stop near my house and decided I needed a personal day from work. One personal day turned into a week, and whatever I had experienced on that subway car had left me drained and depressed. Nothing had happened that couldn't be explained with a little effort, but I couldn't stop thinking about Michael's face looking at mine, reflecting the same awful emotions I was feeling, and knowing that she was feeling them too. I wondered if I was just losing my mind, because I couldn't explain what was so damn awful about that day, except that I felt deeply that it was so, that it was something so awful. The next week, I got back on the subway and I chose a different car. I decided my people-watching days had come to an end, that I should concentrate on minding my own damn business. As I was getting back into my long, neglected novel, I heard the door that connected the cars open behind me. I looked back, and I saw her. Mads had thrown open the door at the rear of the car, and the cold air drifted through, lifting the hair off of my forehead. She wandered down the aisle, looking left and then right at each set of seats, even the ones without people in them. She seemed lost. She looked at the seat next to me, but not directly at me. When she got to the front end, she opened the door and passed through the open-air connecting platform to the car where Michael always sat. It was dangerous to pass through that way. The subway walls had signs warning against it. People had apparently fallen between the cars and onto the track before. The doors were also incredibly heavy, and worse than that, it was a loud and windy crossing that alerted all the other passengers to one's brazenness. I was never one for attention, and neither was my friend from a distance, Michael. Mads, however, was unafraid. You see, I think that's what made her so irresistible. She was brave and bold, except for that moment when she exited onto the Race Street platform the week before. That had stripped her of the fire that blazed through her now. It had reduced her to one of us, the meek. I watched her because I couldn't help myself. She found him and sat down next to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, of course, but I could tell Michael was shocked to see her. She smiled and hugged him and reassured him enough that he gave her an earbud and let her rest her head on his shoulder. I skipped my stop without a second thought. And yes, I had intended to stay on and watch her get off again. I don't think I was in some rush to save her, nor do I think that I could have if I wanted to. No, it was more that I needed to see it happen again, if it would happen again. For my own sanity. I watched as Michael prepared to get off at his stop. She walked him to the door and kissed him. I could tell it was the first time. He stood with his eyes closed for a few seconds after she pulled away, and he didn't open them again until she slightly touched his cheek. She shooed him off the stop and he got off, looking euphoric. He walked to the left with a grin permanently attached to his face, and I lost sight of him. After a moment, the doors closed, and I watched Mads back away from the door. She turned to her left and looked right at me. My breath caught in my throat as she looked into me and through me, and I knew that she had been aware of my presence the whole time. Her look was also a warning to stay away. She sat back down, and the passengers from my car and her car slowly faded away, one after the other getting off and going about their days, unaware of the tragedy that was about to emerge onto the curtained stage of the subway cars behind them. Finally, it was just me and my car and her and hers. The train sped up, and before it could accelerate any more, I hauled the connecting door open, pushing through a gust of rancid subway air and moving across the 2-foot divider to the next door. I pulled the next door open with all of my strength, feeling the subway going faster and faster, tilting and bumping along the slick tracks of the city's underbelly. I pulled myself through on legs like jelly and grabbed on to the closest pole. Mads didn't move at all. She just sat with her back to me, waiting for her stop. I sat down 5 seats behind her and waited with panic growing in my heart. The subway started to slow down with a screech like a banshee, and I held on with both hands as it rattled to a stop. Mads looked up, clutching her backpack to her chest, wearing that same uniform of boots, ripped jeans, and her devil jacket, all of it worn and punctured with holes and rips. The flannel shirt hung open, its buttons ripped off and lost somewhere forever. Mads walked to the grime-crusted doors and waited, tears rolling down her cheeks. Just as the doors cracked open like a corpse's mouth, revealing a dark and rotted tunnel leading down into its putrid stomach, the rear car doors behind me opened with a slam, and Michael walked through. He hadn't left at his stop. He too, I supposed, had to know like I did. He had to see it again to know if it was real. Mads turned slowly and looked at us. "Don't follow me," she whispered and stepped out onto the platform. The orange lights flickered and illuminated her path into hell. Mads ran up the steps as Michael and I followed her. As soon as we stepped onto the platform, I felt a wave of nausea so intense that I crumbled to all fours. It was like being whipped around on a violent roller coaster and then spit out on a dirty tiled floor. Michael seemed to have the same affliction, and when it passed, we both got up and moved towards the steps. We could hear voices echoing along the tunnel that the steps ran through. We started to run, but I could barely keep up, my bones screaming out against the exertion. But still we pushed on, going up and up, following voices and shadows. They sounded like men, maybe 3, and they were laughing. I could hear Mads' ragged breathing and her boots stomping as she ran from them. We kept running up and up, gulping for air, trying to keep up. Come out wherever you are," one sang out. The musical tone bent and ruptured as it echoed along the tunnel, coming back to our ears like notes on a broken piano. Finally, we turned a corner, and we saw it all. Framed perfectly by an orange globe of light encrusted in dirt and mold above them were 4 shadows, Mads and her pursuers. The bulb lit up their silhouettes so that we could see the play acted out, like children watching shadow puppets on a wall. "Grab her," the deepest and gruffest voice said. His voice, too, sounded slightly distorted and unnaturally deep. Mads was screaming. That was the sound that I'll never forget. She was screaming and fighting for her life. She hit one of the men, and he hit her back so hard that she fell to the ground and was out cold for a moment. They started to rip and pull at her clothes, and then she gained consciousness and kicked and struck the shortest one in the face. He cupped his nose and fell back against the wall. Shit, my nose," he was wailing. "I said fucking grab her," the obvious leader of the trio barked. And they did. They all grabbed a part of her and held her down and took from her everything that she was. They took until she was dead, and then they left her there. Their shadows dissipated, and Michael and I just looked at the heap that was laying on the ground. I wept for her, and Michael sank to his knees, doing the same. I put my head in my hands, and when I took them away and looked up again, I was on the subway. I gasped and looked around at all the people and at the normal scene in the subway car around me. I looked at my watch. It was 8 a.m. I was showered, I was dressed, and I was holding a full lunchbox and my purse. My novel was open on my lap. I stood up and walked around the train car, looking left and then right at the people sitting there, looking for her and looking for Michael. Finally, Michael got on. He looked happy. He looked unbelievably happy, and I couldn't stand to see that smile on his face after what we saw. He walked past my seat, looked down at me, and made eye contact. He gave me a pitying and knowing smile that unnerved me deeply. He walked to a seat a few rows in front of me and sat down. A few stops later, Mads got on and danced her way over to Michael. She sat down and they kissed deeply. I noticed that Michael was wearing the same clothes he had on when we followed her through the tunnel. I wondered if it was the day before. I was disoriented and afraid of the time lapse. I stood up and walked over to their row. I looked down at them and saw Michael's clothes were bloody and mangled. Mads' clothes were the same as always, torn and dirty. Her knee remained scraped. No one in the car seemed to notice. Or maybe they just didn't care. I looked down at them and they looked back at me, solemn and patient. They looked at me to help me understand. I looked away from their stare and around at the other passengers, but the other passengers had disappeared. It was an empty train car except for the three of us, and in the car behind us, the homeless man roused from his sleep and stood, swaying at the door, anticipating with deep horror his exit onto the platform. I looked back at Michael and Mads, but they weren't there. I turned around and saw that they were by the subway doors, and we were speeding toward the cursed platform again. They were holding hands and waiting. I gripped the pole as the subway careened towards their destination. It stopped with a neck-snapping lurch, and I nearly lost my balance. The doors, which were not so decrepit now, slid open with ease. Michael and Mads looked at each other with love so overwhelming that I couldn't help but to weep. They stepped onto the platform hand in hand, and their combined light radiated out and away from them, lighting that dreaded platform with warmth and safety. They walked together towards the stairs, and I watched their feet disappear up and out of this realm. I sat back down, alone in the car, feeling a great sense of relief. The next day I had my daughter drive me to work, and she did so from then on. She said she was worried about me taking the subway every day at my age. On the car radio, we heard the report that a young man, Michael Freeman, had fallen or jumped in front of a subway on that same line the day before. He was 20 years old and an only child. I prayed for his family, knowing their grief must have been insurmountable. But time makes grief more bearable. It doesn't erase it, but it shows us a feasible path by which to climb the mountain of hopelessness and despair. And with that, if we are lucky, we could go on with our lives until our own time of passing arrives. I'm writing this down now as I lay in my hospital bed. It has been some years since I watched that love story unfold on the L train. I witnessed the love grow so strong that it blurred the line between our world and the next. A young man, having finally found the vibrant spirit he had been looking for, gave up his future and his life to be with her forever. In doing so, he protected that poor soul from having to repeat her ungodly death over and over again. At least, I hope that's true. But how can I know? How can any of us really know? Maybe she had wanted his sacrifice all along. But without that hope of goodness, I fear I'll go insane. God knows what they're experiencing now and what kind of loop they must endure together. but I think it must be less painful with a partner to hold your hand. Sometimes death is so sudden and violent that it warps the natural path of things. Now that my time is drawing near, I had to write down what I saw so that my daughter might read it and understand that there's so much more in this world than what we understand. There is no real understanding. Maybe not until you experience it firsthand, and even then, everyone's path is different. I don't know why I was able to witness that phenomenon. Maybe I didn't really see it at all, but it changed the way I lived out the rest of my life and how I looked at and loved my precious family all the years afterwards. I can only hope and pray that my own loop will not be so torturous, and that my husband, who I have mourned since he left this world 15 years ago, will greet me and hold my hand through the journey. It's all we can really hope for after all. My name is Daniel Campbell, and within 3 days, I'm turning 73 on the 4th of October, 1993. My 2 daughters, their husbands, and their children are coming over to celebrate it. I'm happy that my life had been so wonderful. Since early 1946, I'd worked as a successful manager in a fishing harbor in the city of Perth, the largest coastal city in Western Australia. I worked there until my retirement on the 5th of October, 1987. Now, one might think that my birthday is one of the best days within a year, right? Well, they're true in a way. I mean, I'm happy that my family comes over and that we're having a great time together. I always smile when I see my 5 grandchildren playing together, whilst we adults, including my 2 daughters, would talk about adult stuff. But despite all the fun I'm having with my family on my birthday, when I'm alone, even if it's just relieving myself, I can't stop thinking about my 23rd birthday back in 1943. Because one day after that birthday, I witnessed something that will stay with me for the rest of my life, and perhaps even in the afterlife when my soul would leave this world. I should start from the beginning, however, for this is my story, the story of the day after I turned 23. After the unexpected attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese armor stormed through Southeast Asia. They took all of Malaysia, Singapore, most of Burma, the entire Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, and many smaller islands in the Pacific Ocean, and also the northern half of the island of New Guinea. Their navy took most of the surrounding seas of these conquered territories, threatening the northern coast of Australia. The only thing that prevented the Japanese from launching an aerial or naval invasion of northern Australia was the fact that the Australian army was still fighting bitterly in the southern half of New Guinea, where the Japanese have a hard time moving through the New Guinean highlands and the jungles that cover most of it. I was already in the Australian Army since 1939, but I had always been stationed on Australia's northern coastline to protect it from possible Japanese invasion. But in March of 1943, I was transferred to the front line in New Guinea alongside many other Australian soldiers. I was not fond of the transfer, not because I had to fight the Japanese, but because of the environment I was thrown into. The landscape of New Guinea was mostly covered with dense jungles, which made it hard to move through. It was also very hot and humid at the same time, which caused my Owen gun to jam on many occasions. Then there was also the dangerous wildlife like mosquitoes that cause diseases, the many small venomous snakes that slither on you when you least expect it, and some unlucky soldiers were even surprisingly snatched by saltwater crocodiles. For the first months when I was in New Guinea, I'd never been bitten by any mosquito, snake, or even a crocodile. This was also the case with some of my colleagues in the platoon I was stationed in. The ones I knew the best were Steve, Oliver, Lucas, and Jack. Steve was a guy that helped others in need, but he could be distracted easily by the sight of all sorts of wild animals. He's truly a nature freak and wants to be a zoologist one day. Oliver is I'm closest to. He's brave and unnerving and willing to risk his life for his comrades. He and I were already great friends a week after we had been stationed in New Guinea. And Lucas might be an excellent shooter with a sniper, but he's a rather naive and shy person, rarely interacting with his fellow soldiers. And then there was Jack. He might have a personal group of friends who I could see as his lackeys. Jack is the guy that boasts about himself all the time how brave and strong he is. But he's just really a pain in the ass. But still, the entire platoon is united by our commander, John Evans, who leads it with an honest yet still iron fist. On the 30th of June of 1943, the Allies launched Operation Cartwheel with the ultimate goal to neutralize the major Japanese base at Rabaul on the island of New Britain. To do that, the Allies had to secure both the island and the islands around it, and the best way to enter New Britain is via the closest shore in New Guinea, which was under Japanese control. In the first few stages of the operation, no real advancements were made on the mainland of New Guinea, but after the successful Allied bombings of many Japanese positions, we did advance northwards, although it was not easy because of the dense jungles. Our main objective was to take the Finisterre Range. By early October 1943, we did make some progress in the dense jungles on the eastern New Guinea as we advanced north. That advance also happened on my 23rd birthday, the day before the day when I almost died, not by the Japanese, but an ancient native horror. October 4th, 1943, 7 in the morning, eastern New Guinea. You'd think a man turning 23 would at least get a decent breakfast. Instead, I was half squatting under a dripping canopy, chewing on hardtack that tasted like termite eggs, while Lucas tried to get his boots out of a patch of mud that had clung to him like it was hungry. A thin layer of mist clung to the jungle floor, tendrils of it curling around roots and gun barrels like ghostly fingers. The air smelled of wet bark and sweat. "Happy birthday, mate," Oliver said quietly, tossing me a small, dented tin cup. "Don't tell the commander." He reached into his pack and pulled out a tiny bottle of whiskey, no bigger than my thumb, wrapped in cloth. I blinked. "Where the hell did you get this?" He gave a crooked smile. "Let's just say I have friends in low, alcohol-fueled places." I glanced around. Steve was crouched nearby, drawing something in the dirt with a stick. Probably an animal track, knowing him. Lucas had finally freed his boots and was now sitting on a fallen tree, trying to dry his socks with a match. And Jack. "Oi, birthday boy!" Jack shouted from behind, stomping his way through the underbrush like he was announcing a parade. "Heard you're 23 today. That's prime sushi meat, mate. Maybe the Japs will make you their birthday feast. You'd pair nicely with wasabi and cowardice." Steve groaned. "Ah, Jack, for once could you just—" "I'm just saying," Jack continued, grinning. "If they find you in the jungle, they'll probably slap you on a bamboo plate, call it a day." Everyone chuckled. Hell, even I smirked. It was Jack's way, annoying, loud, but occasionally funny in the dark. Commander Evans marched by a moment later, barking softly. "Cut the noise. We move out in 5. Stay sharp." We didn't argue. Commander Evans was a leader that didn't need to shout often, because when he did, things went dead silent. And in that moment, I swore the jungle even hushed for him. And then we started marching north. 10:15 a.m. The further we pushed, the more the jungle changed. The sounds of birds became scarce. Hell, even Steve noticed it, pausing occasionally to look up, confused. "Should be more chatter up there," he whispered to me. "This place is too damn quiet." He was right. No parrots, no monkeys, just the heavy thunk of boots in mud and the rustle of ferns brushing our arms and legs. We hadn't seen a single sign of Japanese presence all morning. No tripwires, no gunfire, hell, no footprints even. This was strange. Lucas whispered. "You think we're, alone out here?" "Nah, there's no such thing alone in this jungle," Steve muttered. "Too many eyes." It wasn't paranoia. It was experience. Jungle warfare had taught us to treat every shadow like it held a rifle. But this was different. It felt like the shadows were watching. 1:30 p.m. We stopped for water at a narrow river that didn't appear on our map. No name, no markers, just a curling ribbon of greenish water winding through the underbrush, its surface barely rippled. And that's when Steve said it again quietly. "There's something off about this river." Maybe it's the fact that it smells like shit and frogs," Jack muttered, leaning on his rifle. Well, don't drink it," Lucas replied anxiously. "Seriously, don't." But Commander Evans ordered us to refill our canteens from our reserves instead, and rest for 15 minutes before pushing further. The jungle thinned slightly here. It was a deceptive comfort. The trees loomed around us, their roots twisting like skeletal fingers, and the light that broke through the canopy had a strange green tint, like it was stained glass made from algae. Oliver sat beside me and leaned back on his elbows. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. "What is?" I replied. He pointed toward the river. No fish, no dragonflies, not even frogs are croaking. When water's this still in the jungle, you usually hear something living in it. But this? It's like death itself took a piss here and cleared the place out. "Well, that's pretty fucking graphic," I said in a snorted laugh. But then I looked again. He was right. The river wasn't just quiet. It was empty, like something had scared nature away. Commander Evans ordered us up again. "Let's keep moving. We're 6 clicks from the next checkpoint." 3:45 p.m. We marched along the edge of the river for another hour before veering west into heavier jungle. The further we went, the thicker the canopy became. Vines wrapped around tree trunks like veins. Insects buzzed near our faces but never landed. We hadn't heard a bird since noon. And Steve muttered to me again. This is wrong. The jungle's off. It's sick somehow." He stopped and crouched near a tree root, inspecting something, and I stepped closer. "What is it?" "Bones." I squinted. Buried half in the mud was the lower jaw of some animal. Maybe a pig, maybe not. It was stripped of flesh. The teeth were still sharp. But the strangest part was the black scorch marks on the bone. Not burn marks. It was more like rot. "Should we report it?" He shook his head. There's more ahead, I feel it." He was right. And within another 100 meters, we began to see more. Rib cages buried in the roots, spines snapped like twigs, half-chewed animal carcasses hanging from trees, untouched by bugs. Lucas, for once, broke his silence. "This isn't the battlefield." We all turned to Lucas. "It's a feeding ground," he said in a very anxious tone. No one laughed, and even Jack was quiet. 8:15 p.m. Commander Evans ordered us to make camp early, something about terrain slowing us down. But I suspected he felt it too. A change in the air. We set up tents and sat around in silence, sipping from canteens and polishing our weapons in a quiet that felt like waiting for a storm. The river wasn't far away. We could hear it gurgling, but somehow it felt closer than before. Jack tried to crack a joke just then, something about how the damn trees were looking at him funny. But nobody laughed. We just stared into the foliage, hearing distant whispers. And as night fell, We saw it. Green orbs. Those green things, Lucas whispered. You saw 'em, right? Eyes, Oliver said. It has to be. Jack shook his head, rubbing his temples. Nah, could be phosphorescent bugs. Some of those little bastards shine out like lanterns. Oliver replied, his voice low and tight. Then why are they staring right at us when we first got here? But nobody had an answer. Commander Evans came by a moment later, his rifle across his chest. Get some rest, he said. We move out at first light. But the perimeter, Steve began. Already set, and nothing living will get through it, Commander Evans replied. Right, Jack muttered. But what about something that ain't living, Commander? Commander Evans shot him a look. Then it'll die again. He walked off, but the silence he left behind was heavy, thick like the air before a monsoon. Oliver tapped my shoulder as I laid my head down. I meant what I said earlier, he whispered to me. About what? About something wrong with that river. I don't think we should be near it. I didn't disagree with him. October 4th, 11:47 p.m. I woke up choking on the air. The humidity was brutal, wrapping around my throat like a wet rag. My skin was soaked, but it wasn't just sweat. It was like stagnant water, rotting leaves. But then I heard it. A splashing and a sloshing. It wasn't even raining. I slowly rolled over and peered beyond the tent flap. And that's when I saw them again. 3 green glows floating above the river, but now they were even closer. They moved toward the edge of the camp. They weren't fireflies, they weren't reflections. They were eyes that were large and too high off the ground for a normal animal. And they blinked slowly, one set closed while the other 2 remained fixed on the camp like a predator in the dark. I gripped my Owen gun and tried to speak, but my throat was dry. It was like fear had dehydrated my soul. But then came the sound, a low gurgling hiss. It sounded like boiling water forced through a throat too wide and too deep to be human. Something in it made a sound that made my stomach twist. It was intelligent and calculating, and I swear to God one of the sets of eyes shifted and locked right on me. That's when the screaming started, at 12 a.m. of October 5th, 1943. The scream came from the far edge of the perimeter. One of the privates, Jennings I think his name was, his tent ripped open like paper. What was left of his body was being dragged through the mud by something we couldn't see. It was just shapes rippling through the jungle. They were huge and moving fast, bigger than any crocodile I'd ever seen, bigger than any Mack truck. And then all hell broke loose. Men scrambled from our tents. Bullets tore through the trees. The jungle flashed with muzzle fire. Steve shouted orders. Commander Evans was roaring like a lion. And Lucas was already perched on a rock, sniping into the darkness. But nothing dropped, and more importantly, nothing bled that we saw. I ran with Oliver toward the perimeter, trying to make sense of the chaos, until I saw the river again, and something was rising from it. 3 serpents, each one wider than a tank, covered in glistening green-black scales that shimmered unnaturally under the moonlight. Their eyes were the same glowing orbs that we'd seen, now unmistakably attached to massive horrifying heads shaped like twisted eels and dragons. Their mouths opened like inverted traps, revealing layer and layer of teeth that curled inwards, designed not to rip, but to drag prey down. One of them surged forward with its mouth agape, and I saw Private Balding vanish inside without a scream. Just a wet crunch, and he was gone. Back! Fall back! Commander Evans shouted, emptying his rifle into one of the things, but the bullets barely dented its scales. It flinched, sure. It was probably annoyed, but it wasn't wounded. Jack ran past me screaming, "This isn't real! This isn't—" But he didn't finish. As he was saying that, another serpent whipped its tail like a wrecking ball, sending him sailing through the air into a tree. I heard the cracking of bones, and he didn't get up. Oliver then gripped onto my arm. "We have to move," Oliver yelled. "I can't leave him," I yelled back to Oliver. "Well, we're all going to die here if we stay," Oliver protested to me. Another soldier was caught mid-run, coiled by a serpentine neck, and slammed into the earth so hard his helmet split. Steve was still shooting. His face was pale but steady, yelling for men to retreat into the trees. And then something truly unnatural happened. The river shifted. It rose. It wasn't like any flood that I've seen. It was more like something beneath it was moving. The entire water's surface warped and bulged, as if the serpents were just extensions of something much larger sleeping beneath. Something that I guess we were waking up. Steve's voice cracked into the air. "Go, go, go!" And at around 12:20 a.m., we fled. Branches tore at our skin. The roots tripped us. I could hear soldiers screaming behind us, and one by one, the sounds slowly cut off. I turned to look, just once, and I remember seeing Commander Evans standing at the edge of the jungle, firing his pistol into the river as the last of the 3 serpents lunged at him. His final words, swallowed by a hiss, were a curse that I'll never forget. And then he was gone. Oliver, Lucas, Steve, and I kept running until the gunfire faded behind us, until the hissing and splashing disappeared, until the jungle seemed quiet again. We collapsed beside a moss-covered tree, panting, bleeding, and shaking. Lucas was sobbing, Steve was staring at nothing, and Oliver was clutching his side, blood running between his fingers. We can't stay here," he whispered, and I agreed, but we were all a bit too weak to move. I don't know how long we sat by that twisted old tree, but the jungle didn't just close in around us. It seemed to swallow us. Behind us, the river screamed, not in any human way, but in thunderous crashes of water as those things moved inland. It sounded like a dam had burst, and the water itself had claws. Every few seconds, I'd hear something crack. Not a branch, not a tree. It was solid, almost like bones. "We need to slow them down," Steve hissed, barely keeping pace. His uniform was torn. A branch had opened a gash on his bicep, and he gripped his rifle with all of his might. "There's no time," Lucas gasped. He was wheezing already, stumbling now and then, his eyes wide and twitching. "We'll just keep going," I shouted, and then we got up and ran like animals again, hunched and tripping and clawing our way forward. Mud sucked at our boots. Thorny vines tore at our faces and packs. It wasn't just exhaustion anymore. It was panic. And the serpents were following us. "They're not chasing us," Steve muttered, panting beside me. "What?" I said, breathing heavily. "No, I think they're guiding us like they're playing with their food, and we're that." I didn't want to believe it, but I think he was right. Every time we changed course, try to veer off west or even backtrack, one of the serpent shapes would appear up ahead. A brief flicker of scales in the moonlight, followed by the rustling sound of muscle against trees, blocking us and forcing us on a singular path. It was a path of their choosing. "Well, where the hell are they taking us?" Oliver muttered. And then we saw it. Up ahead, the trees opened into a clearing choked with fog, and in the center, a massive pond sat like an infected wound in the jungle. The water didn't ripple. It didn't bubble. It sat there perfectly smooth. Lucas took one step back. No, we ain't going there." And we all stopped. And then There was a splashing behind us and we turned. One of them emerged, fully this time. This thing was massive. It was towering, its upper body alone as thick as a truck, its head raised high into the air like a cobra. The moonlight hit its scales and shimmered an unnatural green-gold sheen, and in its eyes, 3 on one head, there was a focus that no animal should ever have. It was just staring at us. 2 more came from the sides, completely encircling us. 3 massive serpent-like creatures surrounding the 4 of us, pushing us toward the pool. We raised our weapons, trembling. Steve opened fire, Lucas dropped to his knees, and I gritted my teeth as I fired my Owen gun at one of the serpents. "Go," Oliver said out loud. "What?" I yelled back. "I said go," he replied. I turned just in time to see him rip the flare from his belt. The flare hissed, red and screaming into the night, and the serpents almost paused. Oliver stepped forward with a pained grin. "Come on, you bastards. You want a meal? Well, eat me." He waved the flare overhead, screaming, and he ran at the closest serpent. I tried to move, but Steve held me back. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. I gotta," I thrashed at his grip, but then the serpent struck. Its head unhinged like a wet cloth, swallowing Oliver whole in a blur of red light and snapping bone. The flare dropped to the ground, spinning once, and then it fizzled out. He was gone just like that. None of us said a word to each other, and Steve pulled me by the shoulder. Lucas was already gone, disappeared somewhere into the dark. Whether ahead or behind, I couldn't tell. We stumbled through the jungle again, feet bleeding, eyes wide, hearing every twig snap as a warning. Serpents didn't roar, they didn't charge, but they did follow. They weren't normal animals. There was something else. I felt in my bones a presence that brushed the edges of my mind. Perhaps something was probing me, observing me, learning from my behaviors. My name's Daniel, I thought, and something inside the jungle whispered it back to me. As Steve and I ran, our boots smashed through tangled roots and underbrush, crashing like wild pigs through a forest that had turned on us. And the air was getting heavier. The trees grew more twisted the deeper we ran. Trunks spiraled in unnatural shapes. Bark warped like melted flesh, and the vines writhed slightly when they were brushed. Steve was ahead of me now, hacking a path with his bayonet. His flashlight beam cut a weak tunnel through the green haze, but the darkness beyond was endless, as if the light was being swallowed by everything around it. A tree limb cracked in the distance. There was something massive slithering through it. "I think they're tracking us," I wheezed. "No, I think they understand us." And they did. I could feel it. Like they were studying our panic, measuring our hope to live, and then slowly squeezing it out. Steve paused briefly at a fork in the jungle trail. One side led up a muddy ridge, the other down into thicker vines and mist. "Which way?" he barked. "Ridge. Let's get some elevation," I gasped, my legs burning from the non-stop sprint. He nodded and we moved up the slope, slipping on wet stone and grabbing roots for support. Somewhere below us we could hear the serpents follow. And I looked back. I saw something emerge from the vines below. Just the eye, though. A green, lidless, watching eye. It blinked. "Go!" I screamed, grabbing Steve's pack and dragging him upward. At the top of the ridge, the vegetation thickened into a nest of tangled limbs. We leapt over it, but Steve's boot caught, and he landed hard. "Damn it!" he cried, clutching at his ankle. I turned back and crouched beside him. His face was pale. "Oh, fuck, I twisted it bad," he hissed. "Well, we're not staying behind," I told him. "Well, you won't get far dragging me," Steve protested. I guess we'll have to hide and wait until... But I couldn't complete my sentence as something startled me. A crashing in the underbrush. We saw it then, its long neck, black-green scales rippling like liquid metal in the moonlight. It was just toying with us. I raised my rifle and fired 3 useless shots. The rounds pinged off its scales, and Steve begged me to leave him. He drew his bayonet and propped himself up. "You were always the lucky bastard," he said with a smile that broke my heart. "All right," I replied. "Then you make it count." He shoved me backwards hard. I stumbled, hesitated one last second. I gave him a nod, and I turned and I bolted. October 5th, 1943, 1:47 a.m. I didn't know where I was running anymore. I wasn't dead, but I wasn't alive either. My arms were going numb. My legs didn't want to move. My mouth was open and gasping, but no breath came to me at first. I choked on thick, humid air. My uniform was soaked, and I could smell it on me, that stench of standing mud. I couldn't remember how far I had run, or even when I had stopped. Only the jungle no longer screamed in my mind. It was whispering to me, and I was listening to what I was thinking. I tried to lift my head a few times, but the world swam around me. The trees blurred together, and the canopy above twisted in strange patterns. I do remember there not being any stars or moon. It was just a suffocating green-black ceiling. My heart was hammering in my chest, but my body felt 1,000 pounds heavier. My back was leaning against something. A tree, I thought at first, but it was way too soft and wet, and then it started to pulse. I rolled off with what little strength I had left, collapsing onto a patch of black mud. The heat pressed down on me, and my lips were cracked. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, and I felt my skin crawling. I had tiny itches that danced upon my neck and arms. I swatted blindly, but there were no insects, just the sensation, a phantom itch, like something inside of me was moving. And I lay there for a few hours, completely delirious, rambling nonsense, muttering my fallen names. Oliver, Steve, Lucas. If I stopped saying them, I feared that I'd ever forget that they ever existed. Or worse, that they'd forget me. Eventually my eyes stopped blurring, and that's when I saw them again. Not the creatures, but the eyes, just beyond the tree line, glowing faintly, low to the ground, flickering like candlelight. They didn't move, they didn't blink, but I felt them boring into me. Like they knew I was broken now, that they'd already taken everything from me, except for the part that truly mattered. I believed in them now, and they knew it. 3:40 in the morning. Somehow I found the strength to crawl. I don't know how long I moved. I didn't care where I was going. I didn't have a sense of direction anymore, just a single instinct that screamed one word in the back of my skull. Away. I dragged myself across the jungle floor like a dying animal, through thorned ferns, over mossy logs, under fallen trees. My pack, gone. My helmet, also gone. I'd nothing but my sidearm and a fevered prayer that whatever gods ruled this place had grown tired of me. But eventually, I did reach a ridge. It sloped down into a narrow trail, something man-made, I think. It was flattened earth, and there were shell casings scattered around, and old cigarette butts stomped out by military boots. Patrol route. I collapsed there, face first, in the dirt, the last of my energy draining like oil from a broken engine. The sky above finally began to shift. It wasn't a sunrise, but the faintest gray at the edge of the canopy. I could finally see clouds now, and it was the most beautiful thing that I'd ever seen. But then, darkness took hold. October 12th, 1943. Australian Field Hospital, Port Moresby. When I opened my eyes again, the jungle was gone. The ceiling was white. My sheets were clean. There were voices murmuring behind a curtain. The soft beep of equipment was nearby. I was somehow alive. But as I blinked against the sterile light, my heart sank. Because I remembered everything that had happened to me, and I realized that I was truly alone now. I lay there beneath the scratchy white sheets, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in lazy circles. The hum was hypnotic. My skin itched a bit, my muscles ached, and I could barely tell where the pain ended and the numbness began. But finally, my voice came out dry and cracked. "Where?" A nurse was at my side before I could finish. A kind woman in her mid-30s with brown hair in a tight bun and a crisp uniform. I think her name was Margaret. I only remember because she called me Love once, and I nearly cried. "You're safe," she said gently. "You were found 7 days ago by a forward recon patrol. You've been unconscious ever since." I didn't ask about my platoon. I kinda knew what had happened. Eventually, they came for me the next day. 2 officers in clean uniforms, brass pins, shiny boots. One was Australian and one was American. They asked me for a statement, and I gave them one. And I gave them the truth. From the unnatural stillness of the river to the glowing eyes, to Oliver's flare, to Steve's final stand. I told them everything about the serpents, the silence, the eyes, the impossible scale of the creatures, and how they were toying with us. They didn't stop me. They didn't even laugh. They just stared and took notes. But the moment I finished, they looked at each other. The American cleared his throat and said, "You've suffered significant trauma, soldier. Delirium in the field is common. Heat stroke can cause hallucinations." "Now, I know what I saw," I said, trying to protest. "Grief can alter memory. Some people can cope by constructing elaborate images of events," the Australian officer replied. "No," I whispered. "That wasn't my imagination. That river, it wasn't just water. It was a mouth." They didn't write that part down. When they left, the door clicked shut behind them. Days went by and I saw multiple injured, wounded, or even half-mauled soldiers enter the medical room I was in. They were mostly Australians, but some were New Zealander, and some were Americans. And with the passing of the days, I couldn't help but notice something strange about my other roommates. Some cried in their sleep, some stared at nothing, but some, very few, talked. You see, late at night, when the nurses slowly dimmed down the lights and only the wounded men remained, I heard them whisper. "Did you hear about that patrol that vanished near the Eastern Basin?" one would say. "Yeah, nothing left but boots and packs," replied another. "I heard someone say the trees somehow ate them," somebody else noted. "No, it was the river. There's something in the river." There were more voices and more stories than I'd like to recount. Hell, a man from Queensland said he saw a Japanese soldier get dragged into a pond by something with 2 mouths. A New Zealander said half his platoon was ambushed by a giant crocodile that stood on legs bigger than even a salty. And one American corporal, gaunt and wild-eyed chap, said he saw a giant snake with a human face. October 21st, 1943. I was laying in the hospital bed, certainly not moving too much to make sure that I would feel any pain. Just as I thought to myself to close my eyes to take a nap, a soldier in an Australian uniform walked over to me. The man was darker skinned. He was tall and lean, with sharp eyes like he could see right through you. I believe this was a native Papuan man from New Guinea itself. He didn't say much at first. He just sat beside me and waited until the others were asleep. And then quietly he whispered, "You know, I saw you that night." I slowly turned toward him. "Back when the stretcher team brought you in, you were covered in mud and jungle rot. You whispered names into your unconscious state. Oliver, Steve, Lucas. You're saying it over and over." I sat up a little. "You heard me?" He nodded. "I was in the region. I was guiding for Allied soldiers. I seen the trail that you ran, and I know what followed you." I stared at him with an expression that would ask, "What then?" And then he said one word. "Masala." I didn't repeat it. Not yet. Instead, I whispered, "What is it?" He silently looked out the window, and eventually he spoke. "In our tradition, the Masala are spirits. Spirits of the land. Some guard, some trick, and some kill. They live in the forests of these lands, and within the forests, they mostly reside in watery places. Places that men do not belong." "What?" I asked weakly. He nodded. "They're not creatures. They're manifestations, forms they take to drive men away. They could take the form of a lot of animals, but in most cases they manifest as either giant snakes or crocodiles, sometimes with odd features." The man turned to me and said, "You know, you're very lucky, Daniel. Most people who see the Masalai do not survive. Mostly before the victims of the Masalai die. The Masalai often toy with their prey, and they study and even judge it in every detail. I saw 3 of them, though. 3 monster-sized serpents," I said rapidly, not trying to breathe too heavily. "No, you saw 1. The serpents are heads. They're just parts. But their body is beneath the river." "Why me then? Why did I survive?" I asked him. "Because one of your friends chose to die for you. The Masalai respect that. They take, and then they leave." 2, I said. 2 of my comrades sacrificed themselves for me." Then he stood up and looked down at me one last time and said, "Don't go back into that jungle." And then he left. No salute, no goodbye. November 9th, 1943. The doctors cleared me for light duty, and I was too weak for combat, too unfit for the front line. I was sent back to the northern coast of Australia, near the coastal city of Darwin, far from the jungle. I worked radio towers, transport relays, coastal watches. It was safe but boring work. But every time I saw the water, every time I passed by a river, I paused and I waited. October 4th, 1993. Today I turned 73. The house is full of laughter. My daughters are here, both of them grown and beautiful in ways I could never have imagined when I first held them. Their husbands are good men, kind and respectful, and just a tiny bit afraid of me, which makes me kind of laugh. But the real chaos, of course, comes from the grandkids. Anne, my firstborn, arrived with all 3 of her children in tow. Emma, the eldest, just turned 11 last month, and the twins, Ben and Lily, well, they're 7 and already running circles around the living room furniture like wild dogs. It's a good day. A full house. Elsa, being my wife for over 40 years, made her famous roasted lamb, and the entire place smells like rosemary and sweet onions. She never pried too much about the jungle. She knew enough not to ask, and I was thankful for it. I told her only once long ago, and she held my hand and said, "You survived something you weren't meant to survive. That makes you stronger than most. But it doesn't make the memories go away." Right after I was discharged after the war ended, I moved back to Perth and took a position at the fishing harbor. A cousin of mine had worked there before the war. He vouched for me, and by 1946, I was a manager and I stayed there for 41 years. People always ask why I never moved on to something more exciting, more upscale. But I liked the routine, the structure. I liked that the worst thing I had to deal with was late trawlers or dock disputes. I liked that the ocean, even with all of its mystery, showed you everything on the surface. The sun has begun to set, and Sarah, their husbands, and the grandkids have gone home. Elsa is humming in the kitchen. The last of the cake has been eaten, and the candles have long since been blown out. It was a great birthday. But later on tonight, when everybody had left, I'll sit out on the porch alone. I'll pour myself a small glass of whiskey, the same brand that Oliver smuggled to me on my birthday 50 years ago. Happy birthday, Oliver, Steve, Lucas, Commander Evans, and hell, even Jack. For the longest time, I've been wondering what that was on my wall, because this is all soundproofing, all of this. And I just kind of realized today that I think it's the reflection off of my teleprompter. Anyway, just figured I'd throw that out there. If you guys like an ad-free experience, join me over on Patreon. I'm posting all of my videos over there, probably from a couple months prior to from here on out. It's $3 a month. Helps me, and helps me kind of not depend on YouTube so much. So let's get into this. This one's called No Way Out. Thank God that's over, Dan said to himself as he left the clinic through the sliding doors. It had been one of those days. He'd been caught in a traffic jam in the morning, which made him late for the rest of his appointments for the day. This led to a lot of abuse from some of his patients who'd had to wait nearly an hour over their scheduled time, which in turn led to him working way past his normal hours. But at least it was over now, and he could embark on the long drive home to his girlfriend, Amy. He knew she would already finish work and would be waiting impatiently for him. He checked his texts, and sure enough, there were a series of messages from her, the last of which read, "I saved you some dinner. It's in the fridge. I hope you like frog's tongue. XOXOXO. He grinned to himself. Of course, it was probably leftover roast from Sunday, but he would have eaten anything, even frog's tongue at that moment. He was so damn hungry. The cafeteria lunches never sufficed. He checked the time on his phone. 5:20. That meant he needed to be at the underground car park in 5 minutes, since it closed at 5:30, which wasn't really a problem. His office was fairly close to the car park, and he'd make it if he hurried. He sent a message back saying he had just finished and would be heading home soon. As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, he accidentally bumped into another man. He hadn't been looking and had unknowingly drifted into the other guy's path. The man barely budged, however. It felt like he had just walked into a wall. "Sorry," said Dan. The man stopped and looked at him for a second, quickly mumbling something, and then continued on his way. Though this was a brief encounter, there was something sinister about the way the man had looked at him. It was far too unnerving for just a simple accidental bump. He shrugged it off as just an exaggeration by his tired mind, which had already been finding it hard to think logically during the last hours of his shift, let alone during the last hours of the day. He continued to move through the crowd, which was gaining in size as time went on. It was almost becoming claustrophobic by the time he had made it to the car park. He didn't normally get out this late, and wasn't used to being trapped inside the massive wall of human mass. That was 5:30 on a Friday afternoon. Quickening his pace, Dan managed to find a way through the crowd and make it to the door which led into the lobby of the car park. He pushed it open and escaped inside, sighing with relief, the feeling of claustrophobia leaving him for good. He paid for his ticket and pushed the button for a lift going up. He wondered what Hannah was doing, and prayed that the traffic wouldn't be too bad so he could make it home at a reasonable hour. Now recently, things hadn't been going that well between them. Silly little arguments that held no weight but still somehow seemed to drive them apart. He had actually planned on getting home earlier than normal, in order to give them a long time to have a relaxed discussion since the stress of the week had faded. But it was not meant to be. He sighed, and the automated sound of the lift broke him out of his thoughts. He entered the lift and pressed the button for B5, the lowest level of the car park. As he felt the lift begin to descend, he rested his arm on the metal armrest which ran around the interior. Since he'd been late getting into work, and subsequently the car park, he had been denied his usual spot on one of the higher floors. So instead he had to park on the lowest floor in the entire complex, which really wasn't his cup of tea. It wasn't like he was scared of the dark or anything, but he'd had a bad experience of being locked in the cellar of his own home. He and his brother Alex would go down there regularly to play hide and seek, as it was a fairly large cellar. Down in the darkness, it was hard to see your own hand in front of your face. One of them would wait outside and count, while the other found a place to hide. One particular time, while Dan was finding a place to hide, Alex noticed that their father was returning home from work early, and in his excitement, he completely forgot about the game, and as he ran off, hit the cellar door with the back of his foot. Unfortunately, he didn't notice, and as the cellar door only opened from the outside, Dan was trapped. As the lift doors opened to the dimly lit basement level, and he began walking towards his car, which was the only one left on the level, he began to think about the feeling of being locked in the cellar. He remembered hearing the door shut, and the sudden dread and confusion that filled him. Both he and Alex knew that the door only opened from the outside, so why had he shut it? Was he just trying to mess with him? He had emerged from his hiding place under the old couch and stood up to come face to face with complete darkness. He had never experienced anything like it before. The door to the cellar had always been left open when they played hide and seek. Neither of them had ever dared to shut it. He began to feel uneasy, and then after he had climbed up the ladder and banged on the door to no answer, he began to panic, screaming out and punching so hard that splinters made jagged cuts in his knuckles. He felt as if the air was unbreathable and his heart was going to burst out of his chest. And just when reality began to sink away from him, he had felt a warm sensation of sunlight touching his face. Then he was out of the cellar and in his father's arms, his tears being wiped away. The memories still made him shiver, even today. He shook his head as he unlocked his car and climbed in. He just wanted to get out of this car park basement as soon as possible and get home to Amy. He quickly reversed out and began the ascent to the ground level. As he reached the ground level, he noticed something unnerving. It wasn't any brighter up on the ground floor than it had been in the basement levels. But maybe he was just being irrational. But it was really odd. He felt the same sinking feeling in his stomach when he had been trapped in the cellar by his brother. Sighing, he just shook it off. The car park was almost ready to shut, so they had probably turned off some lights already. In fact, he laughed at it. There was no way he was getting locked in the car park, and he still had plenty of time. But unfortunately, as he rounded the final corner, he came face to face with a closed roller door and a roadblock. This didn't make any sense. He checked his watch again. Still 5 minutes left before the park should have closed. What the hell was going on? Unsure of what to do, he frantically looked around for anyone or anything that could help. This was ridiculous. He could actually see the time on a display near the billboard ads. It read 5:25, and next to it was a neon sign which read, "We shut at 6 p.m. It just didn't make any sense. Well, even if they had shut early, there had to be people still around. He wound down his window and yelled, Hey, anyone there? Could someone open the door, please? To no response. This feeling unsettled him greatly. The sound of the cellar door snapped shut, the darkness imprisoning him in an inescapable vice. Anybody? Can anybody hear me? Still silence. Dan could hear his own shallow breathing. That's how quiet the car park was. The sound from the outside was seemingly blocked by the steel roller door. He wiped the cold sweat off of his forehead and shakily pulled his head back into the car. There had to be a way out. The first thought that came to his head was trying to smash through the roller door with his car. But it looked too strong, and to begin with, he had to find a way through the roadblock as well. It couldn't have shut down that long ago, though. He only had walked in the car park not 5 minutes ago, and the whole thing had been wide open then. He decided if he could find anyone on the higher levels who might be able to help him. Keeping his panic at bay, he reversed back until he had space to turn around, and then began to drive up to the higher levels. As he drove, he realized he was holding on to the wheels so tight, his knuckles were turning white. No, this isn't happening. Nah, it can't be happening. He tried to brand the idea into his brain. Still, he saw no one. Higher and higher he went, desperately scanning the surroundings for a sign of life, but still he saw no one. The dark cement walls and pillars seemed to close in further and further as he went higher and higher, and finally he reached the top level, and upon seeing no one, he panicked. Where the fuck is everyone? He screamed, without even bothering to open his window. He punched his steering wheel over and over again, the erratic beeps of the car horn fading into the great nothingness surrounding him. Tears welled up into his eyes as he tried to calm himself. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. There's no fucking way this can be happening. And then, in the cold silence of the car park, he began to sob. Any hope that the situation could be rectified faded, and the feeling of doom overpowered him. The cellar door was now firmly shut, and he was trapped. No. He had to focus. For the first time since realizing he was locked in the car park, he forced himself to calm down. He slowly took in deep breaths. It was irrational to think that this was the end of the world. Sure, he was trapped in a car park which had, for some reason, unknown to him, closed earlier than it should have. But that didn't mean he was going to die or anything. Just like being trapped in the cellar, he would get out eventually. He would have to stay overnight and, unfortunately, not be able to make it home to Amy, which was definitely annoying, but there appeared to be nothing he could do about it. He took another deep breath, reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He briefly considered calling emergency services to see if there was some way that they could help him, but then realized that no police force is going to send an officer down to help out the idiot who got stuck in the car park. So instead, he called Amy, praying that she would pick up and be in a forgiving mood. Come on, he muttered. The ringtone repeated several times and then abruptly ceased. Amy's voice came on the other end in the form of an automated message. Hey there, you've reached Amy. Sorry I can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message after the thing. He sighed. She must have been in the shower or something. I mean, surely if he left a message, she would call him back soon. Hey babe, it's me. I'm really sorry, but somehow I'm trapped in the car park. I honestly don't know what's going on. I got there with enough time to get out before they closed, but when I tried to leave, it was all shut up for some reason, and, well, there's no one around. I know what you're thinking, but anyway, I'm really sorry. If I could find a way out of here, I'll let you know. If not, well, I guess I'll have to sleep in my car and I'll be home as soon as possible tomorrow morning. Again, I'm so sorry. I really wanted to see you tonight so that we can, talk things over. Can't believe this all happened. Call me back when you get this message. I love you. He ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He sat back in his chair and exhaled deeply. He guessed it would be worth checking to see if he could use the lift or the stairs to get down to an alternate exit. He turned his car back on, and as he did, he glanced up into his rear-view mirror and caught a glimpse of something. A man. He was standing behind his car, and from looking in the rear-view mirror, it was as if he was looking directly at him. Dan quickly whipped his head back around to look at him. He was wearing a blue jumpsuit and a mask over his face. The mask looked like it was forged from hard steel, with jagged edges and sharp points. The mask covered his whole face, with dark eye holes and a vertical mouth hole, which looked like a tiny chamber. Dan didn't know what to do. He looked like a madman, but as far as he knew, this guy was the only other human being in the car park. His only hope for escape. He had no chance but to ask him for help. Dan wound down his window. "Hello, can you help me? Dan didn't get to finish because he was interrupted by the crunching sound of his back window shattering. The man had an axe and had just broken the back windshield. In an instant, he had lunged into the car and was about to swing the axe into Dan's chest. Dan screamed and violently reversed the car to the left, causing the man's aim to be off by a fraction. The axe cut through the seatbelt and Dan's shirt, barely missing his skin. The man was thrown off balance as this happened, slamming into the left side door. He could hear the man panting like an animal, readying itself for another attack. But Dan couldn't stop driving. He knew that. But he had to keep moving side to side or the man in the car would surely tear him to shreds. So he constantly swayed the car, his hands gripping the wheel like a castaway holding on to a lifesaver. Dan twisted and turned the car as the man swung wildly with the axe. The first swing the man made connected just behind Dan's head, slicing off his headrest. Dan screamed and banked the car hard right, causing the man to lose his grip on the axe, dropping it under the passenger side seat. "What do you want?" Dan cried out, on the brink of descending into madness. The man still didn't say anything, but instead suddenly reached over and covered Dan's eyes with his hands. Terror filled him. Darkness beckoned. He fell further and further down the pit. He fell farther and farther away from Amy, her face disappearing into the nothingness. The cellar door wouldn't open. He was hitting it and hitting it, but no one was coming. Not this time. No. No, please. He finally broke out of his daze and slammed his foot down on the brake. The car shuddered violently, and Dan felt the man rise over the top of him, allowing him to see again. The instant his eyes opened, he saw the man impact the windscreen and the glass shattering like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. Dan closed his eyes again and shielded himself as best he could, but he still felt burning pain shooting up his arms and legs as shards of glass penetrated his clothing and sunk into his skin. He slowly opened his eyes and surveyed the chaos. Luckily, he hadn't smashed into anything. He had managed to stop before reaching any of the cars parked in the reserved bay area. The man was not so lucky, though. He had flown through the windshield and landed on top of a small car. It looked as if he was sunken in. Like his impact was so great, it had actually dented the top of the car. Ignoring the pain, Dan tried to gather his thoughts. He had to try and ring the police, but he couldn't stay where he was. There was too great a chance that the man was still alive, whoever he was. But for some reason the car seemed to have stopped. Maybe he had stalled it somehow. Keeping his eyes on the motionless body of the killer, Dan turned the key in the ignition, and nothing happened. No, he muttered fervently, turning the key again and again to no reaction from the engine, and finally he gave up, slamming his hands on the steering wheel in frustration. He then grasped the door handle, desperately pulling it and pushing the door open. He had to at least put some distance in between himself and the man. He put his leg out of the door, but as soon as he put pressure on it, pain shot right along his limb. He shuddered in pain, quickly bringing his leg back inside the vehicle. His only option was try and crawl. He desperately pushed the door further open and then rested his hands on the ground, pulling himself forward. Blood leaked from the areas of his legs and arms that the glass had penetrated, but he gritted his teeth and pushed himself to continue. After distracting himself at least 2 meters away from the car and even further from the man, with his last ounce of strength, he pushed himself onto his back, groaning as he did so. He pulled out his phone and unlocked it. There was a message from Amy there, and as much as it broke his heart, he couldn't read it at the moment. He needed the police. Frantically, he dialed 000, his thumbprints lacing the screen with blood. The dial tone sounded for a few moments before an operator picked up. "Hello, what's your emergency?" the operator said. Dan swallowed, trying to regain his composure. "Yeah, my name is Dan Lewis. I'm at the car park on 87th Street, and I'm being attacked by a tall man with an axe. Please, you have to help me. I need the police, like, right now." "Okay, Dan, you're going to be okay. We've just sent a squad to your location. Now I just need you to relax and answer a few questions. Firstly, what is the current condition of the man? Are you being pursued by him now?" No. He got into my car and attacked me. I was driving and I managed to hold him off by swerving from side to side, but he covered my eyes. So I braked and he flew through the windshield and landed on a car. I think he may be unconscious, but I don't think he's dead, although he hasn't moved since it happened." "Okay, so what is your condition?" "I can't walk. I've been injured by glass from the windshield. How long is it going to take for those guys to get here?" "They should be there within a half an hour. Sir, how far away are you from the person in question?" "I'm not that far. I'm about..." Dan trailed off. As he had turned his head in the direction of the car to look at where the man should have been, he instead came face to face with the man's mask. "Help me, please," Dan screamed into the phone as the man wrenched it out of his hand and threw it away. "What do you want from me?" Dan cried out. The man placed his hands on Dan's shoulders, lifting him up. Barely straining at all, the man threw Dan through the air, and he landed back first on the windscreen of the family car. He grunted. Immense pain shot up his back, like a hot knife sliding through his spinal cord. He twisted and contorted, unable to find any relief. The man then walked back to where Dan's car was and pulled the passenger side door open. He bent down to retrieve something, and with a cold feeling of fear, Dan realized that the man must have been getting his axe. This was it then. He was helpless. There was no way he could escape if he couldn't walk. He knew he needed to buy time until the police arrived, but that was close to impossible to do now. He just wished he could say goodbye to Amy in some way. He was almost starting to regret ringing the police instead of calling her. It had all worked out to naught now. The man, now with the axe in his hand, slowly walked back to him as if he was taking his time, savoring the moment of Dan's demise. Anger began to rise and conquer Dan's fear of death. "Just do it already," he screamed at him. "Do what?" said the man as he reached Dan. Dan choked on his words, not expecting the man to actually speak. It had caught him off guard, and now he didn't know what to say. "Kill you? You think that would be an adequate punishment?" the man said. His voice was very deep and guttural, but something about it was familiar. The sound of it pulled at something in the depths of his memory. He just didn't know what it was. And what did he mean by adequate punishment anyway? What are you talk? Dan was cut short by the man swinging his axe and driving it into Dan's left foot. Blood spurted out of the wound, and the axeman holding the axe so that the blade stayed in his foot. The pain was unbearable. Dan twisted and turned, screaming and shouting, but the man held fast to the end of the axe. He refused to let the pain end for Dan. "Answer me," he said. "Answer me, or I'll just leave it in." Dan choked back the tears now welling in his eyes. "No," he screamed, and the man paused before pulling the axe clean out of Dan's foot. Dan shuddered violently, and his body began shaking from the agony. The tears were now flowing down his cheeks, though he still did not know what the man meant by adequate punishment. Punishment for what? Still, it was good that he appeared to be taking his time, no matter how painful it was. He needed to find a way to stall him. He had to ignore the pain. "I'm glad you've finally come to your senses," said the man, almost chuckling. He leered over Dan so that they came face to face, those endless eye sockets disappearing into nothingness. "You thought I'd never get out, didn't you?" he said, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know what you mean," said Dan, barely getting the words out. The man laughed evilly, placing his hand on top of Dan's hair and pulling it back so that Dan's head lay flat on the bonnet of the car. He then pushed his foot down on top of Dan's injured left leg. Dan screamed and thrashed violently. The man leaned in so that his mouth was right next to Dan's ear and whispered, You know all about the cellar door." "I got locked in the cellar by my brother as a child," Dan screamed out. "No, you didn't," growled the man, grinding his foot further into the open wound, blood leaking out at an even faster pace. "Why don't you tell me the truth? Nothing more, nothing less," said the axeman. I stammered Dan. His mind was reeling. Sirens faintly echoed in the background. The police were arriving. "Say it," yelled the man, now holding his axe with both hands poised above Dan's head. "I locked you in the cellar," cried Dan, the pain overcoming his senses. He had finally fit all the pieces together. He had known his attacker all along. It was his brother, Alex. He and Alex were in fact conjoined twins who had been removed from one another through an extensive surgical procedure. However, there was one slight twist. Their minds were never really separate. It had decreased over age, but they shared all their earliest memories, which was why Dan recalled Alex being stuck in the cellar and took it as his own memory. The reason Alex had been locked in the cellar was that he had not responded to the surgery well at all. While Dan had survived with barely any defects, Alex became hostile and developed an antisocial personality. He disobeyed his parents regularly and often tried to kill Dan. Their mother had pleaded to their father to take Alex to a hospital, but they had refused. The father had never been quite well mentally either, though their mother had stuck with him because she loved him deeply. Their father decided to imprison Alex in their cellar. To achieve this required a risky ploy, having Dan coax Alex into playing hide and seek with him. They only did this when Alex was in a good mood. It took a while, but eventually Dan was able to convince him to come and play. When it was Alex's turn to hide, Dan had climbed out of the cellar and his dad had slammed the door shut tight, leaving his son to die. That was the last Dan had ever seen of Alex, until tonight. Somehow he must have found a way to survive and eventually break out, and now, somehow, some way, he had found him in this car park. "You took your time. Are you that much of a coward?" said Alex. "I never wanted to do it in the first place," protested Dan. The sirens grew louder. He had just had to hold him back for a few more moments. Alex appeared to be so wrapped up in their confrontation that he hadn't noticed the sirens yet. Or maybe he just didn't care. That's your excuse? That's your excuse for making me live in that hell? There's only so much air in that cellar, Dan, and there's only so many insects that you can eat. He trailed off, his words already having made their full impact on Dan, who was rapidly losing color in his face. You can't rid yourself of your sins, Daniel, said Alex, raising the axe far above his head. Sometimes you just have to live with them. And Alex swung the axe. Dan tried to avoid it. He lurched to the left as the axe came down, but the blade landed in the side of his neck. Blood began leaking into Dan's lungs, making it difficult to breathe. He could vaguely hear Alex laughing. Oh, that felt so damn good, Dan. You just have no idea, he shouted with joy. How about I do it again? I never liked the look of my face, so why should you? He said, laughing. Dan, barely able to speak at this moment, gritted his teeth tightly. Did you know that a poet once said that out of all the combination of words in the English language, cellar door was the most beautiful, said Dan. And at that moment, a loud gunshot blasted through the car park. Alex's head exploded as the bullet found its way through the flesh on the back of his head and forced its way out through the metal mask. He dropped the axe. It landed with a loud clang, and then his head fell backwards. His knees bent so that he was in much the same position that Dan was, and an officer appeared at Dan's side. Police, ambulance should be here for you shortly. Is there anyone we could contact for you? Anyone at all? Dan coughed violently, blood leaking out of his neck and onto his shirt. Amy. I need Amy. That was not the last thing he said before everything went black, however. The next day, Dan awoke in a hospital bed. He felt as if he had been asleep for a year. Amazingly, he could breathe fine, though there was a little pain involved. It was at that moment that Amy's face came into his view. "Oh my God, you're alive," she said jubilantly, tears of happiness filling up in her ice blue eyes. She bent down, kissed him hard on the lips, and then embraced him passionately. Dan wrapped his arms around her, but at the same time a strong sadness overwhelmed him. He began to cry into her top, letting out all the emotions that had been trapped inside him since he had been locked in the car park. "I'm so sorry. It's all my fault," he wept. "Shh, it's not, okay? Let's not talk about it for now," she said calmly in a way that made him feel good. "I love you so much," he said. "I love you too," she said, kissing him once more. She finally let go of him and stood up. "Okay, now, the first matter of business is..." But before she could finish, she was interrupted by a beeping emanating from her pocket. She frowned, but ignored it. "Anyway, as I was saying, the first matter of business is, I'm allowed to tell you that recovery will take a while, but you should eventually be able to breathe without a machine. The bad news is, you won't have your foot anymore, but you could get a prosthetic one. They were saying that they're really easy to fit and stuff. You'll just have to get used to it," she said brightly. "It sounds good to me, but I think we could discuss all that stuff soon. Right now, I'm so hungry. Does this place have good food?" he said, and Amy laughed. "They sure do," she said. "I'll call a nurse and stuff, and I'm sure we could get you something." "Great," replied Dan. Later on, after Dan had explained everything to Amy over lunch, she sat by his bedside while he enjoyed some much-needed sleep. She still couldn't believe all that had happened, and that Dan had managed to live through it all. She had already known about the story of Alex, but it was still a shock to find out that he had managed to catch up with Dan. They had both assumed that he had died in that cellar. While she flicked through a magazine, she remembered that she had never checked the text that she had received while talking to Dan. She pulled out her phone, and as she read the message, her blood ran cold. It was sent from Dan's phone, which the police force had been unable to recover at the crime scene. "Hey baby, I can't wait to see you tonight." I never believed in the dead. Despite how intrigued I was with genres such as horror and thrillers, there was little to no interest in the deceased. There was an unnameable disgust toward death, regardless of my love for a rare ounce of psychological arousal. As a young boy, life introduced me to Urbach Veith, and since then has eroded my ability to fear. In short, I couldn't worry or discern fear even if I desired to. I won't be able to experience something crucial like feeling warmth for the first time. Still, I engrossed myself in fear-inducing experiences: cinema, literature, haunted house walkthroughs, or roller coasters. You name it. However, I haven't had the slightest idea why. Conceivably, the meddling of the undead toyed with my mind. The unintended enjoyment of necromancy felt vulgar. Personal tastes aside, I would say that the dead should stay dead. Funerals were distraught, freak accidents turned cruel, and post-apocalyptic undead remained defensive. The work of disdain concealed itself beneath false satisfaction as I got older and more experienced with society. But nevertheless, I still clung to my favorite genres and found compassion in tales of grotesque fables. Behind the ghouls and cryptids stood genuine happiness and suspense and monstrosities. But that's what I assumed would hold out the longest. At the time, I was old enough to move out of my parents' house with their permission. 18 or so. I had devoted every penny and dime to this moment, and now it is finally happening. Every bit of hope for a new start will transform into a new life ahead of me. When faced with this opportunity, I wasn't scared. My parents, however, considered it too precarious and prayed for my security. Others believed it was a gift, a miracle even. Fear is an obstacle. It gets in the way of life. Then what's the point of living if you can't experience that vital emotion? Like that day. Part 1. I just moved in. It's a reasonable village townlet down south of Hudson in Westchester County, New York, yet it's still lively and flourishingly happy. Most of the place stands surrounded by lush trees like a forest, almost too crowded to reach the lake stretched by the Hudson River. As an austere individual, I fancied it here, far away from the city and in Mother Nature's embrace. Who wouldn't in my stead? Before arriving at my place, I toured the perimeter and explored new routes. Driving down an unknown road, I spotted an aging building just about the periphery, and this surprised me. The town demolished abandoned buildings since they adopted to improve the environment, removing unnecessary waste such as the structure. And from what I've heard, all the surrounding facilities remain eradicated, whereas this one, not so much. Once out of my vehicle, temptation and curiosity got the best of me as I discreetly strolled to the building's entrance. As I got closer, it diverted my attention when one of my heels unintentionally struck a heavy object. It turned out to be a sign, faded and crooked over the past years. The words were practically unrecognizable as I gently laid them down in their original location. I returned to survey the building once more and took in further details. It was a bar. It looked like any old bar. However, this one undoubtedly had a distinctive aura encircling it. The tavern was constructed of swarthy, thick wooden slabs, almost all impaired and fading in color, making it look effete black. The patched windows and doors with wooden planks, Only the splintered basement door at the side stood bounded with dense, rusting chains. Another enormous sign above the roof hung for dear life as one of its hinges managed to loosen by the wind. It was an unusual sight. However, sight undermined the reason why I never trekked onward. It reeked. It was pungent and putrid. The bars stank of some burnt animal left to decay. Innumerous figments of rancid stretches came ubiquitous. My nose wrinkled and cringed as I attempted to fan out the disgusting stink. It smelled like blanched smoke. Even in the face of the odor, something else forced my head toward the eerie edifice. There wasn't a defined answer, yet one word undoubtedly described it. Addictive. Something within smelled addictive. And after several stern glances and desperate attempts to avoid my gaze, I slackened myself from getting too suspicious or weird. Turning around and away from the bar, I backed my car into the main road, often wincing from the potent malodor and surrounding dust. As I drove off, from the very corner of my vision behind me, I could have sworn the presence of the sudden dim lights flickering in the tavern. Now, when it comes to autumn, there ought to be autumn rain. It was showering endlessly. Most of the vicinity was either flooded or soaking wet, and because of this, I spent most of the day in my apartment, studying outside the window facing the nearby woods. I just can't help but brood about that abandoned and broken down bar. Was it that important, I wondered? I pushed and focused and returned to study for an exam for the week. With my mind clouded with fixation and boredom, I couldn't help but drift off to that lonely place. It was odd, though I never drove deeper into introspection. I was fortunate to have a roommate, but not just any roommate. You see, Niall worked for the town's tourism department. We rarely spoke to each other despite common interference. It's not like we saw ourselves as burdens. We maintained several errands outside of our apartment, and the possibility of communication remained low throughout our work and studies. However, if we did, we would converse about plain day-to-day topics: weather, shopping lists, work, college, saving money for rent, the average stuff. Niall arrived about a half hour late from his regular schedule due to the storm. He was soaking wet, his trench coat hanging onto him like a vast dripping blanket. He greeted me with a warm smile before heading to his room to wash off. After a few hours, we shared tea and gentle conversations in the living room, the atmosphere calm and peaceful with the sound of rain outside. The weather reminded me of the crippled bar down the road. I asked him about it. His lips twitched to form a thin line. He set down his lukewarm Earl Grey tea on his lap, his eyes wavering uncontrollably. He managed to crack a half-hearted grin before responding. That bar? The one off the road near the lake? I nodded. Forget it. You shouldn't interfere with that place, Niall said dismissively. It's considered a bad omen to talk about the tavern. It isn't a popular topic among the folks here. I didn't know what he was blabbering about, so I went along with him and played it out. Really? My tone gradually tinged with amusement and curiosity. Well, it's up to interpretation on what's real. He paused. Say, you believe in the supernatural? Niall questioned. This act of query made me raise my eyebrow. Depends what you're talking about. Cryptids? Aliens? I asked him, never looking up from my cup. No, the undead. The undead. Ghosts and zombies? No, not really, I admitted. I don't think about ghouls more than I do any supernatural or paranormal. I mean, why? What of it? Well, you see, Niall started placing his hands together and fiddling with them. This town has its infamous folklore passed down from generation to generation, though it's very recent to date back. It's been a tradition to tell them to kids so they wouldn't wander too far into the woods. He continued. However, this tale isn't all that fiction, like how most portray it. There are different variations of the story. Almost every house has one. But nevertheless, the initial gossip was originally a retelling of a real murder case with several disappearances. And it all ties back to that godforsaken bar. My roommate glanced around before straightening his posture, and he looked me in the eyes, dead serious. "You want to hear the story of the bartender?" Niles whispered slowly. I leaned in, patient and keen to listen, until Niles stood up and waltzed to the hallways. Now, in all honesty, it stunned me. I stared, scrutinizing for an answer. Was this merely jesting? "Maybe tomorrow. Curfew hours," Niles simply stated and yawned, positioning himself against the walls to turn off the lights. "Ah," I merely exclaimed. "All right, get some rest, pal." Pressing my thumb and index finger between the nose bridge, I groaned in sudden exhaustion, descending back to my chair. Grabbing my phone from the foyer table, I caught a glimpse of the time, 11:54 p.m. Hell, it couldn't have been this late. Observing my disappointment, Niles shrugged. "I could get copies of the case files. The department doesn't do anything but safekeep the documents. I'm sure they won't mind." "Thanks, Niall," I said. He hummed before dragging himself to his bedroom. I stayed a bit, wondering if my interest perked from the obedience to the paranormal. I frowned, bothered and anxious. There's no such thing. Before heading to bed, I remembered something. I'd forgotten to tell him about the bar's grotesque smell. What's so strange and foul about it? How about the lights flickering on? Was that my imagination as well? Too tired for anything else, as I succumbed to hypnosis, I thought perhaps tomorrow I'll ask him. Part 2. The following morning my skin met a frigid wind. The windows were open, letting the breeze blow into the room. The air grew quick with the scent of smoke. I grimaced at the familiar smell. "Damn," I mouthed. Thinking about the bar influenced my ability to function. Peering out the window with tired eyes, I noticed the rain had finally stopped. I quickly got up and started my morning routine. Niles disappeared just by seeing an empty bed in his room, but the lukewarm dark coffee on the table confirmed he had left the apartment recently. He was probably doing his morning errands just like usual. If anything, I should be the one preparing to go out. Halfway through the tram pilgrimage, I learned journalism class had been canceled via email, presumably a flash flood yesterday. Although disgruntled, I found myself in the campus library. I locked myself in a private cubicle and I got to work. Then I extrapolated this as a reasonable time to research the bar while Niall was away. I got my laptop out and searched the town's webpage, later discovering information regarding the bar and its history. And at first, nothing popped up unless you scrolled down far enough into the website. The bar's section was brief, skimmed through, almost as if a mere text was lost and forgotten. Some articles included missing persons from the 20th century, no doubt related to the tavern, yet weren't particularly forced on the cases. I was looking for the undead, still nothing. Several hours into my studies, my back began to strain and pull from my abnormal position on the stiff seat. I decided to go for a walk. All around me were the beautifully colored skies and raining maple leaves. The leaves scattered throughout the cement road as I walked upon them. I tried to avoid the puddles as much as possible, but even that couldn't put my mind to rest. By the end of the afternoon, my energy drained as my shoulders scrunched in fatigue. At the local park, I sat on a bench, watched the kids play freebie while the adults chatted about the incoming holidays. I watched until my mind traveled to what Niles said last night, an undead entity that haunts the bar. It's impossible. Those things don't exist. Or do they? I had no idea. As the sky transitioned to night, Niall called, notifying me to return. His voice sounded urgent and swift. He said he had a surprise awaiting in our apartment. Of course, I had already suspected the surprise gift, but played along. I returned the favor and said I would return in a few minutes. Immediately, Niall's premature chuckle found its way to my ears before hanging up. I knew this would be a gift to be shared, a gift to be recognized. Niall dragged me inside and harshly locked the door behind us, which was unusual behavior. Inside the living room, the center coffee table has been replaced with a large box with tape sealing every crack visible. I turned to him, curious, before going back to the package. Must be the surprise that he prepared for me, I thought silently. Niall stood behind me and nodded, granting permission to open it. Inside, I found it brimming with items. Multiple crumbled police files along with preserved photos and newspapers dating back to the early 1940s. I looked at these strange and random objects while inspecting each one of them. My roommate convinced the sheriff and the tourist department to give me some files for my diminutive research. It turns out they had given almost everything related to the tavern. They said the cases were going cold. Not enough evidence, and most of the things said and done were probably mere coincidences. Just too good to be real mishaps of the past. When he finished, he told me about the old folklore that haunted the town, or perhaps the bar where it died. The fable began during the late 1900s, though most details had insulated from the original as the village grew older and more people moved in. It's now a town story to prevent young children from wandering too far into the woods, or a demon will find them and devour their souls. Contrary to most of their beliefs, these stories were all too real. As for the entity, many didn't believe in the paranormal, or just this one. In the 20th century, the bartender from Heaven's Bar got shot, decapitated. The upper skull had blown off of their jaw and scattered throughout the bar. Witnesses stated the murder was a result of an unspecified brawl. The suspects? Unknown or undisclosed. Rumors have it that the police hid evidence due to bribes. The work of the mafia, but no one knows for sure. The customers didn't recall anything during interrogation, possibly from a state of shock, yet they always remembered the faint smell of smoke and blood from the disturbance. What was strange was when the haunting started. Things disappeared and reappeared in places unimaginable. Wine bottles and glasses will spill and crash unsuspectingly, and random collisions in one room but never the next. It took a turn when a man said to have seen a knife fly past his head in the public restroom. The police investigated the area to find no clear entrances where the knife had entered, but the only proof was the switchblade stabbed into the wall left from the incident. But it wasn't only things going missing for a certain amount of time. Individuals started going missing and were never found, even to this day. Although the missing persons didn't deliberately connect to the bar, people talked. What's stranger was when the bar's manager disappeared after the closing night. The disappearance only added to the mystery that shrouded the story in the town. Many suspected it to be the spirit of the malicious late bartender or a possible demon by its actions. Some even said it was the devil itself. But whatever it was, it remained a debate until the bar officially shut down in 1945, before the owner vanished, possibly from the horror and the lack of customers. Other complaints included reports of foul odor within the pub. Regardless, It remained a suspicion until someone dared to challenge the entity. Now, just about 10 years ago, a group of young teenage boys defied the rules and stories of the demon and went to the bar. They wanted to test it, pester it, mock it to see if the foolish folklore was authentic. From the written police record, the leader, a 15-year-old, threw a rock at one of its windows and cracked it, and then they ran for it, although still absurd, towards the abandoned lonely place. Mysteriously, the boy wasn't with them. They went back to check, only to find his lifeless body on the stairs of the bar's entrance. Investigators tried to figure out the cause of death, but it didn't seem right. They said the cause of death was due to charcoal burning. From charcoal? There wasn't any traces of charcoal from the surrounding areas, or the boy. By suicide, perhaps, but that's very unlikely, and to be done within a few minutes was impossible. He was just dead. None of the boys saw what had happened, nor did they give a good hint of evidence. In the end, the case halted and remained unsolved. After the unfortunate event, more people who countered the bar negatively began to die from sudden deaths like drowning, falling from buildings, unconsciously leaping in front of moving vehicles, and unexpected suicides. Some disappeared, similar to many years ago. One young photographer working for the town's newsprint took a picture of the bar before hanging herself the next day. But that is not all that got discarded from her. She managed to capture an image of a figure. The figure stood surrounded by black smoke, especially the head, and wore a black and white bartender uniform, the exact suit used when the bar was still open. This photo was one primary clue to justify that the entity was the dead bartender. Paranormal inspectors tried to link the images, the figure and the photographs the young bartender had taken before they died. After months of investigating, they had finally found an answer. It was indeed a match. The townspeople erupted. They were fascinated by the discovery, but fearfully hesitant about the subject. They didn't know what to do. Some thought of eradicating the whole building. However, they will suffer an ill fate. Others just didn't believe the story, dubbing its dubious marketing strategies for the tourist department and the town. But in the end, no one dared to approach it. As the years went by, the town got used to the unnatural phenomena surrounding them, masking it with ignorance and skepticism. When people started disappearing again, it caused most community members to flee out of fear. Since the vicinity wanted to keep its image and ignored its horrendous past, its introduction to the grim tale remained limited. However, when I heard those stories, I couldn't help but grow more fascinated by this entity. The questions solved became several more inquiries and clustered my curious mind. I was fascinated, yet I was very confused. The undead comes back to haunt the living. I started. There has to be a rational explanation. Are there any motives? Was there a motive? Niall shrugged. He halted before responding. Well, the same thing applies to serial killers. You don't know their motives half the time. The other half is when they don't know either. He examined me, never leaving my sight. You don't believe in it, do you? It was my turn to shrug. I don't know, everything seems absurd. Photoshop's the thing, you know. The room became still with tension. Niall wanted to argue with me, but he held his tongue. A couple of seconds in, and I would have already lost it. Yet, perhaps from the luck of God, I remembered my question from last night, and so I asked. Say, there was this smell in the morning. It reeked like the bar's very smoky, yet putrid. My roommate threw his head at me, horrified. When was this? 2 days ago? One? Most recent was this morning. You need to leave this town, Niall said brutally. An uneven air swept between us. Now. Part 3. My face morphed into confusion, then conflicting emotions hit me all at once. I laughed. I can't leave this place. I just got here. Besides, I ain't leaving because some fabled goon who's responsible for the disappearance of dozens. Why? Just because you didn't believe in that doesn't mean your life isn't in danger. He barked at me. Disbelief. My mind was in utter disbelief, more disappointed, if anything. In a state of pure shock, I spoke my opinion. I dictate my own life, Niles. If there's a serious hypothesis for any of the happenings, here's what I think. The town is to blame for its irresponsibility in further investigating the cases. Then they started using jaded fairy tales to excuse their poor sob-ass authorities that couldn't find those people and capture the real suspects. And so I continued. And if you're worried about me, then shit, how about yourself? Why not move out of the village if you knew something was out to get people? This time, Niall had it. He heaved a groan. Fine. Do you really want an answer? I'll give it to you. My brother went into that damn building since he sniffed up some scent by the bar. He vanished a week into madness, and he never came back. And I'm only here because I'm certain he's still alive. I'm certain the bar has something to do with it. My eyes widened at his confession. It explained a lot. His reaction and possessive attitude kept me away. Yet despite hearing his side of the story, I recovered from my sympathy and stated my thoughts. Niles, my condolences, but I nevertheless stand with my argument. Your brother's disappearance might not be related to the bar. I explained. That's a make-believe story. There's no ghosts or undead to dismiss or even to blame. You're being a bit delusional. If he's missing for so long, if that thing is real, he might have died, Niall. He's dead. My words that night were something I regretted for a very long time. Niall left the apartment after our argument. He drove off into the woods, and God knows where he was heading to. I didn't bother to call. It was best to assume my response gave him a difficult time. I would have liked him to adjust to his feelings before returning, so I loitered for a day. 2 days, 3, and then it turned into 5, and then I waited for a week, but he never came back. And the weight of guilt slowly drove me mad until I filed for a missing persons report. However, that wasn't even enough to soothe me. Phone lines weren't reaching him either, and as I waited, something in my mind screamed danger. That something wasn't right. I disputed as much as I considered what Niles said. The authorities were just ass at their jobs, pretty much lounging baboons in uniforms at most. If someone were to look for him immediately, it would have to be me. I had already scouted the town, and to my surprise, no one saw him either. My best guess would have been to go searching in the forest. The road down by the Hudson River grew bumpier and more forgotten as we passed more oaks and rocks. It was so close to winter that the ground was already frozen. The radio jammed some light jazz music, yet my fingers couldn't stop drumming the steering wheel out of stress. My gazes hovered towards the trees, hoping to find my friend Niall within them, but still no sign of him. Soon it was already afternoon, and I couldn't look further. Circling the area, I purposely left the best for the last. Niall specifically told me not to go near that place again. However, desperate situations call for desperate measures. I didn't want to lose him. Driving by a tight corner, I catch a glimpse of silver gray. As I drew closer, I held my breath and let go when I noticed it was a car. It was Niall's car. The car was there, yet no person was in sight. This wasn't like him. Confusion and concern spiked my mind. I traveled further to look for him. There's no way a person could roam this far by foot if it's going back to the town, unless there was another destination they could have gone to. My breath hitched, stopping in my tracks as I contemplated my anxiety. The bar was near. After a few minutes, I noticed a glimpse of the bar's roof. Making my way down the path, I finally found the bar's location. I was grateful for once. However, something was wrong. I parked right across the abandoned bar once I arrived. The tavern nevertheless remained the same, though wooden slabs patched the entrance. I quickly went up its steps and jiggled the rusted doorknob. Sweat dripped down my head when I heard an unmistakable click. And that's when I noticed the rigid planks weren't bounding the frame. They never had, just mere decorations to deceive the naked eye. Once the door opened, I peered inside. Dust caked the walls and all the furniture was still there. The wallpaper curved out of shape, dull and moist. Some of the corners had gotten mold between visible cracks. Furnishings toppled over, some destroyed, and the stench grew more potent. Yet, I didn't care. I was looking for something or even someone. And there I saw him. Niall. A wave of relief came crashing as I came kneeling towards him. Seemingly hiding under the bar counter, Niall sat idly on the floor. His legs didn't seem to work. One of his ankles had a painful purple and green bulging in size. Sprained, I thought. I wondered how Niall managed to move around. His caving body wasn't any better. The guy had been shaking since I saw him. What the hell happened? Why are you even here, Niall? Why's your leg like that? I asked him. I don't know. The bar. It spoke to me. The door wouldn't open, Niall frantically exclaimed. I was driving around when I stopped at a curve to calm myself, but then I smelled it, and I couldn't move. My head started spinning, and the next thing I knew, I showed up in this damn building. It wanted to toy with me. Everything seemed so out of place. Things were moving. The bar was moving. Just get me out of here, he said, sobbing as I tried to calm him down. All right, it's okay. We gotta get you out, I reassured my friend. Grabbing onto his arms, I pulled him and slowly made my way to the exit, until I saw it. Like the photos, everything remained accurate. The dark pigmented skin, the bloody outdated bartender uniform, and most of all, its decapitated head. Its tongue freely wiggled as if it had a life of its own. Blood from their wounds continuously spilled into their uniform and floor as smoke piled up the ceiling. The teeth were still intact as the gross flesh sat on its head, and despite wearing old-fashioned cloth, the style showed prestige. However, blood and gore covered its body as if a child had splattered red paint against it. The thing was rotting from the inside out. It stood there, taunting us as the walls creaked and groaned, almost like it was alive. What was familiar, though, was the smell. Seething, charcoaled flesh. The source of the odor had been here this entire time. I could have laughed, but I didn't. It was all too real. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen or heard of. I couldn't move. No matter how hard Niall or my mind screamed to move, my body wouldn't budge. I couldn't help but get drained and observe the situation. It felt as if my feet stood physically glued to the ground. I stood there staring at it with exhaustive stares and a dry throat. The thing suddenly tilted its head, decapitated from the jaw while blood poured out from the reaction. The dead stalked forward towards us. Some of its blood spilled onto my hands and face, foul and disgusting as it burned my hands with toxins and scum. Stank just like its smoke. It made me let go of Niall out of instinct. I tumbled out of the bar onto the floor and into the ground, panting intensively, never looking back into the building. From my suffering stomach, vomit came rushing out as I heaved myself from anxiety. What the fuck was that thing? But then suddenly, a new wave of panic hit me. Niall. I left Niall in there. My legs scrambled up and marched onto the steps where I paused. The undead bartenders stood in front of me, tilting their jaws yet again. It lightly bobbed its shoulder as a gesture of amusement. They found this gravelly entertaining. It slowly raised its hand and waved before the doors started to swing. From that moment on, I heard the faintest words before they parted. That rasping voice teased the living as it danced with the death. It mocked both of us. It ridiculed me. "Goodbye," was all it said to me. I didn't flinch. However, a lump rose from my chest when I realized what it was doing. With every ounce of strength I had left, I bolted. I ran faster than I did in my lifetime, more quickly than I could think. Everything ached. Sweat dripped down my chin as I screamed for my roommate's name. Niall called back to me, his arms stretching towards the closing door as he cried, "Samuel, wait!" The door closed and clicked locked. I spent hours hammering at the door. Sometimes I tried to peel the wooden slabs off the bar, but to no avail. I would return to the door and pound again. My head became faint, and my tired eyes grew heavy with tears. I yelled for Niall's name again, but it was too late. Niall was already gone. It was that time of year again. I live in a small urban settlement along with roughly 20,000 other people. I'll try my best to keep the description brief. Barely anything usually happens here. We have an unusually low crime rate and people are freakishly very friendly, but I've never seen this as a bad thing. It's an average town, you could say. Townhouse, a court, one hospital, a police station, a fire station, 4 primary schools and 3 secondary schools, several religious buildings, 3 churches, 1 mosque, and 1 synagogue to be exact. An unusual low amount of clothes shops, for a town that size, and a lot of pubs though. What can I say? We drink to get drunk. There's several hotels, restaurants, banks, entertainment centers, etc., etc. But driving through here, you wouldn't think much of this place. But there is one unexplainable presence we've all shared for many generations. My mother and father would have had it ever since they moved here in 1987. Our next door neighbor, who has lived here since she was born, has had it, which is the year 1949, I'm told. My best friend Steven has had it. Actually, now that I think about it, everybody my age from my town naively posts about it on Facebook all the time. It's the tongue of the town for the youth, but our elders are never comfortable talking about it. My mom and dad are happy to talk as well, but when I asked our neighbor for more details, she seemed almost panicky and shut the door in my face, all the while giving me a pathetic excuse to not interact with me about it. This event all links back to that time of year. It starts out with the weather. The cold, fresh air of spring is suddenly replaced by this horrible, heavy, humid atmosphere. Even just going to the shop feels horrible, and it's hard to breathe. Thunder is frequent at nighttime, but the weird part is, there is no lightning or precipitation. It's just this loud rumbling from the depths of the sky. Next are the animals, and I'm not just talking about the average household pets like literally the cats, dogs, birds, ducks, and rodents. It's all of them. Ducks don't stop quacking and birds fly in circles and become, well, idiots basically. They start flying into cars, buildings, and trees. And the same goes for people with tropical birds as pets, non-stop tweeting and flying into the rail of the cage. As for rodents, they dig holes in people's gardens, which is a nightmare for hardcore gardeners like my father. Now, I have 2 dogs at home, 1 male and 1 female. The male becomes agitated and extremely paranoid. All day he will stare out of the window with absolute concentration, almost like he's in a state of total focus, ears fully pricked up and shaking and whining all day long. I've seen mental patients that seem more at ease than him. Any little sound or movement from outside will make him go apeshit. My family and I decided it would be best not to disturb him during this time. Anytime he's not barking or whining, he's howling. And this is quite odd because he's a Chihuahua. The Huskies and German Shepherds do it as well, but it seems normal coming from them. My other dog now is a different story. For this period of time, she sits in her basket solemnly sulking, breathing heavily. She'll barely even eat, which is very out of character for her. She looks completely miserable. I didn't even think this could happen to dogs. She's a Jack Russell and a King Charles hybrid, and because she's a female, it's in her nature to be calm and courteous. But this is just disturbing. You could rub her on the ears, and she loves that. Put food right in front of her nose or call her name repeatedly, but nothing will work. It's like she doesn't exist for the week, like she's alive in another universe. Her body is functioning, but she's not there. And if you think that I had it bad, you should hear about my friend Emma. She owns 2 cats, both female. This week is when the cats just turn into complete lunatics. It's so saddening and disheartening to see all the dead cats at the end of the week. Whatever's going on, it just turns the cats into bloodthirsty savages. Emma dreads this week every year. Cats are kept separate for a whole week, but it's not just other cats they attack. Emma's cats have been known to attack her as well. Oddly enough, though, this only occurs during the night. Over the last few years, she's complained of menacing meows coming from both ends of her bungalow. One night, 2 years ago, she actually left her bedroom window open while the cat was in the back garden. She awoke at 7:30 a.m. to a searing, stinging sensation shrouding her scrawled and scratched face. She didn't come to school for the rest of the week. She still has one scar below her left blue eye to this day. And for everyone, the animals are what concern them the most, but for me, it's the dreams that I have. I'm not the only one to get them. In fact, I'm pretty sure everyone in town gets them around this time. The only way to describe these dreams are strange. They're just not out of the blue kinda weird though. The stories we have shared with each other about our dreams simply cannot be explained by the average human being. To put simply, they're bizarre. Nothing particularly wrong with them most of the time. In fact, these strange dreams are normally funny. A few I remember is my family trying to get a snake out of the house, even though there are no snakes in Ireland. It seems pretty normal. I'm not really sure why that one stands out though. Other strange dreams during this period have included me being the spectator at a boxing match between Anne Frank and a baked potato. A feeling of complete joy when I found the matching pairs for all of my odd socks, and me being the captain of a submarine filled with 600 people. However, all the people were just the closest members of my family. So, there's 200 sisters, 200 mothers, and 200 fathers, which is slightly odd, right? But those were the nice dreams. There were a few, however, that were a little more sinister. Every year during this week, I would have at least 2 nightmares, as far as I could remember. The most I've ever had is 3. One that stands out was me in the middle of nothing, literally surrounded by total blackness. Not darkness, blackness. Darkness is where there is an absence of light, but this place is just a void of everything. Every time I looked down, up, back, forward, I just saw nothing. Like I was blind, like I was trapped in a big black box. I tried running, but it felt like I was just running at standstill. To keep up with my own sanity, I was terrified. After a while, though, I began to hear a faint sound. It only took me a few seconds to realize, but it was the old alarm siren used in Britain during World War II to signal that the Germans were about to attack. This sound always used to scare me, but for some reason, I felt a sense of relief when it came on during my dream, a feeling that I wasn't alone. That didn't last long when I suddenly heard the faint sound of a young child weeping. Not the "I didn't get what I want and now I'm going to throw a loud hissy fit" kind of cry, but the child was experiencing genuine emotional pain for the first time and just didn't know how to react. Just a silent weep. It wasn't just that I could hear this, but I could also feel the pain too. It was like a mass mix of emotional torment and blinding confusion. The feeling of, I'm an innocent child. Why do I feel this way? As an impending nightmare was due for this week, I decided to set my alarm for 3 a.m. to wake me up halfway through it. I may not be able to sleep afterwards, but to be honest, I was just sick of that weak mental state feeling the whole day after you experience a horrible nightmare. You never know. Maybe I'd get lucky this year and just have a lot of pleasant yet strange dreams. So I set the alarm and I read a book to help me get sleepy. It was as soon as I had closed my eyes that I had drifted off. Later that night, as expected, I gained consciousness in a dream. At first, I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but judging by the feeling of dread in the dark, damned atmosphere, this wasn't going to be pretty. I was trapped in my parents' suite bathroom. The room was dark, and the sky outside was a very dark shade of purple. Out the window, I could see no moon, but there were several stars shining very brightly. I had no clue where I was. I could hear faint piano music coming from the attic. It wasn't like a hauntingly peaceful melody, though. It was like a 5-year-old child violently smashing it randomly. However, whoever it was playing it in perfect rhythm and was only banging the high notes. To put it straight, they were playing utter gibberish, yet they knew exactly what they were doing. I wasn't even sure that made sense. Now, this room is probably the smallest in my house, only behind the cloakroom and the heating press. I put my hand on the door handle, but I couldn't leave. Not that the door was locked or anything. The door might have or might not have been locked. I didn't even know. My brain wouldn't let me push down the handle. I tried, but my arm wouldn't budge. I panicked and I grabbed my right arm with my left, and I tried to push it down, but my arm just wouldn't move. Hell, I tried kicking the door and running into it. Nothing. I sighed and accepted that I was stuck here. I approached the other side of the room. I profoundly refused to even look at the mirror. I just decided I'd just try waiting this out with that god-awful piano music playing in the background. But suddenly, without me even realizing, my head started twisting towards the mirror slowly. I tried my best to resist it, but just like with the handle, it was no use. Slowly but surely, my entire body slavishly drifted towards the position where I'd be posed perfectly in front of the mirror. I tried to turn my head, closing my eyes and looking the opposite direction, but I simply had no control. I was left staring at my perfectly lit up reflection for some time. I had a neutral pose upon my face, but I knew I was frightened out of my wits. What was going to happen? Why was this happening? When will it end? I had so many questions, but such little information. All I had was this dark room and myself, the banging piano music still playing over and over again, and without warning, it stopped. I paused all my thoughts because I couldn't control my body. There was this maddening silence for what felt like the longest minute of my life. Usually in total silence, the human mind will start making you hear things, but not this time. Total lack of sound. My body posed perfectly still, but in my own head, I was completely freaking out. And then it started out of nothing, completely deafening me. A shrieking beeping noise. Hell, it sounded like my phone. My phone? My alarm. My alarm was going off, but I wasn't waking up. I continued to stare at my own terrifying reflection, with the somewhat relieving sound of the alarm perforating my dream world eardrum. The alarm getting louder and louder and louder, the piano music started again, blending in with the alarm's beeping. That's when my head started tilting. That same expression on my face in plain sight on the mirror, but my head tilting ever so slowly to the left. With every bang of the piano, my head would move the tiniest bit, but the rest of my body stayed perfectly still. All I could do was watch until I got it to the point where my head was bent down at an impossible angle to even still be alive. My neck and head hung loosely from my shoulders, still with the same blank expression, like nothing was happening. But then that changed too. A demented smile started to grow on my face. The piano banging from the attic started to speed up as the alarm music started to become twisted, switching back and forth from playing normally to backwards, and the volume and pitch started to become distorted, playing at different volumes. The smile kept growing and growing until you could see even my wisdom teeth. My hazel eyes opened wider and wider as my pupils swelled up my entire iris. Blood started to drip from the sides of my mouth as the smile started growing beyond my cheeks. The piano music no longer had rhythm or was professionally played. It just sounded like somebody repeatedly smacking their head off of the keys as high and low notes were going off, sharp notes clashing with flat ones. My entirely black iris started to shake in my eyes as blood rushed down from both eyes, and the once enormous smile on my face was now a gaping hole in my head as my teeth fell out, one by one. The black iris in both eyes shaking furiously out of control. I suddenly froze. Everything froze. The music froze. What now? I don't have an attic. I don't even have a piano. I woke up screaming as if I had just been stabbed in the damn leg. Today was not going to be a good day. I opened the window to get a breath of fresh air, for getting the air was still humid and horribly wrong. There was no wind whatsoever. I walked downstairs to get some food, and my family were all acting normally. Nothing unusual going on between them. I checked my phone to look at the time. The thought of it even looking at that thing only sent shivers down my spine. I checked it to see if anything was off. One new text from Emma. Well, that was expected. I usually do. My withering senses, however, were new. I was becoming paranoid all of a sudden. This is the first year that this had happened. Emma had texted me asking what time I was getting to the bus for college. It was things like this morning, which I was extremely grateful for. My ordinary, boring life. It had settled me down from my traumatizing night. It had been 7 days now. I was just now waiting for the next few days just to fuck off. I enjoyed my average daily weekday walk down to the bus stop, only with just one bit of thunder startling me on my way. I approached Emma waiting for me at the stop, wearing her usual headband with a daisy attached to it. Now, she was a bit of a hippie. She was fiddling with her long blonde hair, staring off into the distance. She looked like she had something bothering her. I could tell by her facial expression. I'd known her for about 10 years, and these were always her actions when there was something making her feel uncomfortable or upset. "Hey, what's up?" I asked. "Hey, the usual, and you?" she replied. Yeah, definitely something wrong. Usually her response would be sarcastic, witty, or even teasing, often insulting me. But that's what I loved about her, one of the best personalities that I knew. "Are you sure?" I inquired. "You seem a little off," I admitted. "Oh, it's just that time of year again, you know. Had a pretty messed up dream last night," she replied. Well, you're not the only one, I said. I had an awful dream last night. Yeah, but you deserve one though, you shithead, she said with a cheeky little smile. Ah, there it is. I giggled it off. Well, what was your dream about, anyway? No way I'm talking about mine, fuck. You pussy, she exclaimed. Mine was freaky as fuck, though. I dreamt I was locked in this creepy-ass attic playing a piano, and I just could not stop, no matter how hard I tried. My face dropped. There was like a bunch of other weird crap as well, like I kept hearing this alarm going off. I interrupted immediately with a pose of despair. Her face turned from bright and bubbly to empty and frightened. How did you... Wait, what? She mumbled, while mildly flailing her arms towards her head in disbelief. All I could do was watch, mouth opened, while Emma was close to breaking down in panic. I grabbed her arm and comforted her, trying my very best to calm her down. Usually, I was never very good at these kinds of things, but Emma always appreciated the effort of people comforting one another. Her breathing was heavy, and a rare look of dread had overcome her usual quirky face. We stared at each other for a few long seconds, trying to catch up with reality. For a brief moment, I had forgotten all about it. I was expecting this usual town to just pass on as it always did. Until now. There was something menacing about all of this. Why does it happen here? My cousins in the neighboring town had never experienced it. But why the terror? Why all the animal chaos? Scores needed to be settled. Somebody knows something. We need to talk, I told her. No response. That was a yes. She knew something. It was mutually agreed that we both take the day off to discuss plans. The story explained for this town. It's just the drastic change in weather causing it all. But that can't be it. I know that it's not. This town is brainwashed and has been for years now. My neighbor was hiding a secret from me, a secret which clearly made her feel at unease. What had her so agitated at this time of year? Why did she change the subject and freak out any time I brought it up? I was just so goddamn sick of just being given stupid, insincere, vague slander for answers all of the time. Well, no more. After I brought Emma home and spent about an hour calming her down, we set out to my neighbor's residence. Emma hated anything to do with the supernatural or the paranormal. She acts tough around most people, but I can see right past it, and she knows it. She won't watch any horror movie that doesn't have any logic behind it, always giving some abysmal excuse to everybody, while at the same time texting me complaining why we have to watch such filth. Even just a silly little coincidence could leave her rocking back and forth in extreme paranoia for the guts of an hour. I couldn't even imagine how she was dealing with this right now. My neighbor had always been a very introverted person. I've been her neighbor for 14 years, and for as long as I can remember, every single night she has had the blinds pulled on every single window in her house. Anytime I wave at her in the street or stop to say hello, it was like she never had any time for me. She has one daughter who visited her quite frequently, and every week a group of other elders visited her house for approximately an hour, although sometimes they could be there up to 4 hours. The longest they've been there is 4 days, if I recall correctly. These elders I also recognized from the town. There were always 4 regulars there for every single meeting. Rain, wind, or shine, they'll be there. And the most I've ever seen is well over 20. This odd behavior has always intrigued me. The house itself looks like any other house on my road. It's clean, painted white, and has a well-kept garden and a shed. There's nothing out of the ordinary then, I suppose. Now, as we approached her house, we noticed the absence of one silver Mercedes. That was the signal for the go-ahead then. Emma and I decided it would be best to enter her house from my garden, and so we ventured through my house, out the conservatory door, and peeked through her kitchen window and the dining room door which led into the garden. There was no sign of her. I hopped over the fence and landed on the grass, only to be met with a tongue-biting scrunch sound against my shoe. I leaned over and brushed my hand through what I had discovered was fake grass. Fuck me. Why would my neighbor have plastic grass? Come to think of it, she has no grass or plants on her front garden either. It's made entirely of pebbles and stone. Emma then hopped over the peeling green fence and landed on the so-called grass. I stretched my hand out and rubbed all her flowers, trees, and the bushes. These were all artificial as well. I honestly didn't know what to make of this. I'd never noticed this before. It all looked so real. To have your garden reshaped like this just must cost her an absolute fortune. Emma stared at me with a concerned perplexity. We spaced out for a while, trying to make out what this was all about. We agreed to keep going before she got home. She ran ahead of me and looked through both windows, and that's when I noticed something absolutely horrifying. The daisy in Emma's headband, it was curling up, all the petals turning brown in seconds, the stem turning into a disgusting murky dry yellow color. Sure, the daisy was already dead, but rotting just as soon as we got into the synthetic garden, and at that rate, I thought it was best not to say anything. Emma then jerked on the door, but nothing. We tried all the windows on the side and the back of the house. They were all locked, and that's when Emma took a clip from her hair and started twisting and turning it into a picklock. She stuck it into the keyhole and fiddled it around for a few seconds before we heard the victorious click of the lock giving in to our demands. Emma crept inside and instantly turned around to me with a wrinkled-up facial expression. As soon as I set foot in the house, I knew that she was signaling. The smell. It was just the overwhelming smell of tar. Now, this house looked like the ordinary suburban 80s house, but the inside looked like an 1800s cottage. Her kitchen table was just a large slab of marble. I desperately looked around for a light switch, except there were no lights. I looked around one more time. All candles and fire-lit lamps. No plug sockets could be seen. The only light coming from outside, and seeing as there's no sun, the atmosphere in here was absolutely miserable. I checked around one last time. There was absolutely no electricity at all. Candles decorated the counters, stoves and pots scattered everywhere as well. This was a total clash to the synthetic garden within eyeshot of us both. The slight headache that all the colors of the garden had given me were unsettlingly soothed by the plainness of this residence, and without hesitation, we continued on to explore the rest of the house. The hallway was laid out pretty similarly to the kitchen and dining room. No lights, stone walls, and creaky wooden floors. You would expect this place to be freezing, but it was much warmer than the kitchen. The smell of tar was now much stronger, and Emma and I were finding it very difficult to breathe. As we went through here, my vision started to blur, and my pace started to stutter. I resorted to a clumsy, disoriented mess within a rapid space of time, struggling to make any sense of the situation. And then suddenly, there was an unexpected thud. Now I half-heartedly hauled my heavy head to the source of the sorrowing sound. After half a second of tensing my focus, I saw that Emma had lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground like a rag doll. After the realization, I made my best effort to struggle over to her assistance. For now, this needed to wait. We both needed to leave. I limped to my best efforts over to her body laying in a heap on the dark, damaged floors. I placed my left hand on her warm left arm and grabbed her right shoulder with my right arm. I hoisted her up as quickly as possible as my vision started to fade into darkness, merging objects into indistinguishable blobs. I slowly stumbled towards what I made out to be the front door, and I placed my hand on the knob and twisted to only confirm my worst fears, that it was locked. Now I literally had seconds of energy left. It would have taken a miracle for me to make it back down out of the backyard before I had passed out, and with nothing left to lose, I headed for the hallway door leading back into the kitchen. As I was leaving the main part of the hall, something had caught my eye. It was where the stairs were supposed to be. It was just 2 doors. I paused and gazed over with all the attention I had left in my brain. Suddenly fearing for my safety, I thrashed towards the exit with the mightiest effort I could afford. I could never put Emma in danger like this. I could never forgive myself if something ever happened to her on my hands. On my watch, I was determined not to let anything happen to my best friend in the world. So it was now or never. I was resolute to just get out of here, and fast. But fuck me, everything went black. My vision was completely gone. The last thing I remember feeling were my knees crashing down into the ground with a sudden feeling of failure and misery. The optimistic, determined thoughts once zipping through my head during those final moments were now replaced with total eerie quiet, a lack of understanding and emotion. We had collapsed, together in arms, waiting inevitably for whatever fate we had brought upon ourselves. A queasy, nauseous feeling dominated me when I had regained consciousness. It had taken me a few seconds to recall the events of what just happened earlier. Disoriented, dizzy, and bewildered, the seriousness of the situation had slapped me like a hot, wet towel. The smell of tar was still present, but I was unsure as to whether it wasn't as bad as it was upstairs, or if I had just become used to it. I assumed my eyes would just adjust to the darkness of this indefinite area, which was deceivingly pitch dark. When I turned around then, I was hideously surprised to see a slab of white concrete, like the one in the kitchen, in clear plain sight, just as it was in my dream, like a painting set on a black canvas. No, there's no way. This couldn't be possible. I looked around this room, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. Menacing, brutal, and downright disturbing decorations lingered around this space. Hanging from the ceiling from nooses were dead foxes, dogs, cats, and even small rodents such as ferrets, rats, and even little pet hamsters. Including amongst these were kittens, puppies, and other young animals, all just hanging there. Some had their skin torn off, some had been disemboweled, eyes gouged out, and their teeth pulled from their gums. All of them were different and had their own unique treatment. All animals had a look of pure pain on their faces, something which I never thought I'd ever be able to have to tell. My eyes followed them down from head to toe, analyzing the torture these creatures had just been put through. Puddles of thick crimson blood pooled underneath each carcass, and seemingly almost gathered into one big glossy ruby ocean. This horrifying, brutal image forced me to lean over and projectile vomit all over the floor, making the puke look like it was just bouncing off of nothing. I coughed several times after, spitting up little remains from the contents of my stomach, procrastinating myself from having to look up at these poor animals again. Now, trying my best to seek beyond the mutilated corpses, I slowly put one foot in front of the other to try to find a way out. My sanity was draining, having to walk past it all. Eyeballs, blood, and guts were still dripping from them, with an odd body part landing with a slightly squidgety sound onto my clothing. I kept on walking until I saw something faint in the distance. I stopped and I squinted, still feeling a little dizzy from all the vomiting. But with that, I tiptoed as quick as I could towards the mysterious dot, all the while trying my best not to disturb the hanging creatures. As I approached this dot, other dots started appearing in the distance. First, tens, and then I could have sworn hundreds of them. After a spell of squinting, I noticed that these were all paintings. All of them were the same. Every single one I saw was just a painting of a gray eye enclosed in a whitish gray frame. Just one eye, which covered almost the entire width of the frame, took up about a third of the height, and was placed dead center in all of the pictures. I found myself staring into one in particular, even though they were all the same. After a while, pondering about, I started walking in parallel with the paintings. I had no idea where I was, or how big this room was, or even if any of this was real. Was I just dreaming from passing out? I mean, usually my dreams aren't this sophisticated, but for now, I was only focused on finding Emma. If I found her, I could almost assure myself that I wasn't dreaming, as it was once in a blue moon that I had a dream with people involved. I mean, yeah, it happened, but rarely. Now, while thinking about it, I kept one eye on the paintings. They started to slowly evolve realistically. The first few I saw were just plain gray eyes on a black canvas, and were pixelated like how you would see on the old Nintendo 64 or something. But as I progressed, they started to become more detailed. Suddenly, while still developing, I paused to stare at one in particular. Bloodshot. I flicked my eyes back to the previous painting. A perfectly healthy eye. I tilted my head to the next one to it, also bloodshot. It was clear to me now that this was part of the puzzling progression. I took another look around the rest of the room. Animals were still hanging and dangling everywhere. I was now convinced that this was a dream. I'd been walking for at least 4 or 5 minutes. I studied my trail, and the hanging creatures littered the room's horizon. There is no way somebody would go to all this effort just to hang those animals from the ceiling. Would they? I continued forward with constant alternating attention to the paintings and the animals, looking to suss out an upset in the pattern. It was because of this that the smallest little factor had caused me to jump out of my skin with sheer fright. A ringing. I had no idea what it was, but it was very faint. I started to do a mild jog, but keeping alert. To my much unwanted revelation, this ringing was starting to sound a lot like screaming as I started to advance towards the source of the noise. And with that, I halted to a sudden stop. All my surroundings were still the same, the screaming remaining now at a disgusting ambient level. I thought to myself that if I was able to get out of this dream with any ounce of sanity, I would need to take this risk. "Emma!" I roared out with a desperate might. The screaming stopped. All sounds of any sort stopped, the room all of a sudden lacking an echo. A silence so quiet that it hurt my ears. You could hear the sound of your own bodily organs performing their tasks. The fated heart of mine pounding away like the sound of a child banging his milk bottle off his cot. And then that stopped. I was left in this total silence for minutes on end. I tried to look around, but my head wouldn't move. I tried pointlessly running, to no avail either. All I could do was stand around and wait for this mind-numbing phase to stop. And then the alarm went off. Within that second, all the pictures collapsed off the wall and all the animals fell off the ceiling simultaneously. The floor was now a bloodied mess of corpses, ropes, and broken frames. Red paint started leaking from the eyes of the paintings, seeping on the floor and blending in with the blood. The ringing of my phone alarm was now monstrously loud, shaking this realm with a thundering roar. The ringing forced me to curl up into a ball on the ground, holding my ears, while trying and failing to just drown it all out. And out of the corner of my eye, a man and a woman, as pale as mannequins, walked motionlessly hand in hand toward my crippled, tormented body. And with the room still shaking furiously to the deafening, ringing roar of the alarm, and me now drowned in blood, guts, and glass, my eyes started uncontrollably crying. Suffering through it all, I seemed to have no choice but just to start shouting, "No, no, no," over and over again. Each no getting louder to the point that I was starting to cough up blood, my throat torn to shreds from shouting too loudly and frequently in such a short space of time. I could now feel the words coming out, but I couldn't hear them. The music stopped. The shaking stopped. I was staring into total black and exposed to total quiet once more. My eyes were now stinging from the acidic teardrops gushing from my face, my lower lip dripping blood combined from the fierce biting of it and the constant curdling coughing from my esophagus. I knew what awaited me as I was about to look up, and hesitantly, I steadily jolted my head ever so slowly up towards the ceiling. My eyes made contact with, and were repulsed by, the eerie sight of an all-white bride and groom staring into my soul with ghostly white eyes. They said and did absolutely nothing for the first time that I struggled to get back to my feet. Their heads had followed my every move. Vice versa, I hadn't taken my eyes off of them either. Those eyes were horrific, empty sockets of self-destruction. But I got lost in them somehow. I eventually made it back to a normal stance, my breathing as labored as a marathon runner. Who are you?" I stuttered. How could I not? I didn't know how they were going to react. "You need to wake up," the woman uttered in a monotone voice. "What?" I replied. "You need to wake up." I tried my best to maintain my current facial expression in an attempt to stay calm, cool, and collected. "Just please explain to... Wake up!" This time louder and threatening, while still monotonous. "You need to wake up." Her voice starting to become demented and twisted now. My breathing became heavier. "How do I return?" I asked patiently. "Wake up," she mumbled once more. "Wait. What the fuck?" Her voice now suddenly worn out, as if she was on a caffeine crash. "Please, Tim. I need you to wake up." I shut my eyes and imagined myself making it back to reality. "Emma needs Tim to wake up," she muttered again. Her speech resembled somebody who is sleep-talking. The piano music from earlier started to play again. I shut my eyes and opened them again and again. I was now seeing the same old blackened room, but a slit of light started to glow in the gap between the man and the woman.
"You need to wake up, Tim,"
the woman uttered in what sounded like a dying last-ditch effort. It was then that I noticed that the man was talking as well, but all I could hear was a woman's voice. I contemplated on what to do. I put my left foot forward while staring at the light. I outstretched my arm and quickly gathered walking pace. Slowly but surely I made my way towards the light, the piano banging still throbbing in my head. With the two menacing statue-like beings guarding over me, I felt safe to just now leap into this unknown light. They had made me feel safe. I awakened in a dark room. The only light source came from 4 flaming torches at each corner of it. My hands were tied behind my back, and there was a noose hooked around my neck. Rusty-colored pentagrams scattered the walls, the floors, and the furniture, and I gazed up to see 6 figures standing about 10 feet directly in front of me. Their necks pointed upwards in a religious-like pose, dressed in all black from head to toe. Black gloves, black robes, black everything. It took me a second to realize that the banging piano music was still there. I searched around frantically to locate the source and discovered something that was engraved in my mind, even still to this day. "Tim, help me, please." Emma struggled to speak over her mindless organ bashing. I could barely make out my surroundings in the dark, but her furious banging of the piano contrasted completely to her almost total limp facial expression. Blinking slowly and going cockeyed, I caught eye of a drip beside her, which was hooked up to her arm. I looked right back at the hooded figures who were staring right at me. My neighbor. Her eyes had that evilness to them, the type of a person you just wanted to vanish. And looking into those eyes, I experienced a resentment like I never thought was possible. My blood boiling and raising as this bat took a step closer towards me. I remained perfectly calm and still, while pouting an angry poker face, but on the inside, fear was tearing me apart like a clumsy chainsaw. Only a few feet away from me now, Emma stopped banging the piano. I looked over at her lifeless body, almost floating on the seat. I squinted once more at this, just a little perplexed, not realizing my concerns were about to be solved. They started chanting 4 words in Latin, in that horrible, monotonous tone that I had to bear once again. The only word I could make out was et, which I know was the French word for and the other 3 words began with P. As the tone became higher and the chanted words louder, all the pentagrams in the room began to glow, revealing a darkened room similar to the blackened nightmare. Dead goats and chickens missing their heads, hooves, and other various body parts all stuffed into little rabbit cages, all mutilated from what I presume were satanic rituals. My facial expression no longer able to contain itself, all I could do was roar and screech. I looked back over at Emma, who was now banging the piano once again. I noticed that 4 strings were attached to her, 2 to each arm. My eyes followed the strings up near the ceiling, where I laid my sights on a marionette, which was bouncing up and down by what I understand to be just totally thin air. With the pentagrams now lit up, one of the hooded figures ran up behind me. The chanting continued, but the hooded figures stopped completely, standing there and staring at me. The piano music continued its noisy path. I felt 2 cold, bony hands press against my back. I gripped my teeth and continued to hysterically struggle in the ropes. I heard a whisper in my ear, a cold, almost smoky kind of whisper that seemed to rush through my brain and slice it up. Goodbye. And without even thinking, I jumped up and gave a mighty bolting kick like a horse to the evil little gremlin behind me. I posed my feet on his abdomen against the wall behind us, my neck now loose in the noose. I lifted up my neck and I pulled my head out, thumping to the ground face first. My nose now stinging, but I didn't give a shit. I now was fully focused on getting out of here. I rolled over onto my back and used my clenched fists to push myself back up to my feet, and by the time I had, the other 4 hooded figures had rushed to the man's aid. I started to escape. Flashbacks of the white-eyed woman began to appear in my mind. You need to wake up, and running in my mind over and over again. This only made me more determined to escape. All the cages opened up, and the animals started flying towards me. Chicken claws, goat's eyes, even a horseshoe had caught me on the knee. I was in a tremendous amount of pain, but I continued toward the steps that led towards the door. The violent piano music, the pale-eyed woman, and now the twisted ringing flurrying into a harrowing whirlwind of dread and terror. The water now gushing out of my eyes can't even be labeled as tears, as I simply had no emotion. I was simply oblivious to everything around and focused with all my own thoughts. As the 4 hooded figures were now chasing me, I ran into the door, not even a little considered about the pain. The door seemed to quietly dishinge in slow motion as I landed face first into the tiled hallway. I laid eyes upon the front door and gasped in overwhelming joy. I once more rolled onto my back and wiggled as fast as I could backwards towards the door as the hooded man ran with determination. I gazed at them in unobvious despair, as I had now just gave up. My efforts gone unrewarded, it seemed. At least I had tried. But on the contrary, they all miraculously fell to the ground simultaneously as soon as they had gone past the door. Life resumed to normal motion as I watched them suddenly suffer horribly. I caught a glimpse of one of their faces, which were suddenly turning into a burning hot pink and covered in expanding facial boils. Their screams were painful to hear, sure, but at the same time, relieving. I looked up once more above their heads and saw that this was one of the 2 doors that Emma and I had seen earlier before we had collapsed into nothingness. I stood up and ran to the kitchen, remembering the front door was locked, but that Emma had used a picklock to open the back door earlier on. And with one last peek, I saw the spine-chilling basement now totally engulfed in flames, with no sign of that repulsive woman escaping. Good. Let the bitch burn. I hope she stays alive down there forever, burning. I placed my hands above the flame of a candle in the dining room while glancing at the slab of marble I had encountered earlier. The smell of tar seemed almost inconversant to me now. Latin writing decorated all of it, and one particular sentence had caught my eye. I couldn't remember back then what it had said exactly, but I instinctively knew that it was the same words. The words had now brought back my recent experiences. I spewed vomit all over the floor, along with a few drops of blood. I felt a burn on my hand and heard the rope drop to the floor, the heat from the basement now starting to radiate, and with that, I jerked at the sliding glass door which would lead me back to the synthetic garden and eventually to freedom. But it was locked, of course. I grabbed the candle holder, ran back with all the mighty strength of a desperate creature, flung the object at the window, and it gave out with a mighty smash. I quickly maneuvered through the glass and ran and jumped the green, rotting fence once again. I was home. I entered my house through the conservatory and went through to the bathroom, my noose now red and swollen from my experiences. Little drops of blood decorated my face and clothes, with a big blob hiding just under my nostrils. I stripped naked and I got into the shower, throwing all my clothes in the back of my wardrobe. I wasn't going to be wearing them for a while anyway. I thanked my lucky stars that my parents were gone. There was no way I was going to have to explain anything to them. Now about a month has passed since the events I just described, and I'm sitting on the couch with my father about to watch RTE News. This has been my routine now for the last month. They think it's for a different reason, but I need not explain why. That woman? Why is her house still intact? Why is she still intact? She seems just as normal as ever, like nothing ever happened. I've lost about a stone in weight, but why should I eat much? I have no reason to. I missed all my college exams, and it looks like I'll repeat them in August. If the opportunity even comes around, that is. My parents have been trying to help me for a while now, but they've given up on me at this stage. I've kind of become a statue to them. I don't eat, wash, or interact. Why should I? I know that I haven't much time. The National Police have now launched a national appeal to help find 19-year-old girl Emma Townsend from County Kildare. Emma is described as being 5 feet tall inches with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Emma was last seen leaving her home with her friend during the afternoon of April 28th, wearing navy tights, denim shorts, a white shirt with flowers, and a headband with a daisy in it. She has now been missing for approximately 1 month. Police have encouraged anyone with information to contact them immediately. In other news, many people across County Kildare have come out to pay respects to respected artist Anthony Johnson and his wife Belinda, who both passed away this day 50 years ago. Anthony, who was considered a painting prodigy, would often paint unusual sights, which would include paintings of dead, mutilated animals, close-up of human eyes, and his most famous painting of his hometown with a purple and brown sky and dead vegetation. Wife Belinda was also remembered for her descriptive poetry, which included themes such as death, misery, and depression. Labeled as an Irish Sylvia Plath, her most famous poem, titled Alarm, talks about how the many alarms used throughout the years, linking back to herself, saying the poem was a warning to her own mental health. Other poetry would describe her usual dreams, her hatred of hot and humid weather, about animal instinct, and one poem named Creatures focuses on how any little change to our world could upset the behavior of animals. On May 26, 1963, Anthony had hung himself in his home while his wife was found dead beside him on his piano. The cause of death were both ruled as suicide, as Anthony suffered a broken neck and Belinda suffered an opium overdose. A shot of their graves came on the TV with the words, Probedius proetae et pictori, scrawled across it. I had found out everything, their story, their struggle, and my neighbor's obsession. Both Anthony and Belinda were seen as outcasts by our town. People made false allegations that they were satanic and made sacrifices because of their strange art and poetry. It was only after they couldn't take any more and both committed suicide that the town started to respect them, that people realized their talents. I thank Belinda every night for saving me. I fell asleep almost instantly last night. I was sick of people asking me all about it. I didn't want to be reminded of Emma's alleged disappearance. Friends, family, teachers, counselors, they don't care about my well-being. They just want the truth. That night, I dreamed I was walking through a field of flowers, and in the middle of the beautiful plants was Emma, her pale skin glimmering in the sun, her ocean blue eyes reflecting her own beauty. I approached her standing in the same white dress that Belinda once wore when she appeared to me in that dream. I stared at those big, beautiful eyes. Then they turned pale. All the flowers around me suddenly withered and died as quickly as the sky had turned into a mess of dark purple and brown. The banging piano music screeched once as Emma's face turned into the same blank expression as it did in the basement. I felt my neck twist down past my shoulder once more as a maddening grin grew right across my face. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. I saw the blood trickle onto the deceased field as Emma's skin turned into the numbing blue corpse color. Emma is trying to warn me. Belinda is trying to warn me. And I could feel it when my neighbor glances at me. That I know that she is coming for me.